Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today's story takes us to the breathtaking Lamora Citadel, where the fallen warrior empress Iria Vian is sold like cursed merchandise at a cosmic auction, until an ordinary human cargo pilot, Joran Volt, calmly buys her for 1 million credits and shocks the entire room. What follows is a powerful reminder that kindness can be the most dangerous kind of rebellion. Instead of owning her, Joran gives Iria dignity, safety, and a choice, then invites her to fight not for revenge, but for people who are starving under a corrupt regime. The lesson is clear. Real strength isn't domination, it's respect and responsibility. A single brave act can ripple outward and change systems built on fear. And sometimes the most unexpected person, the one who looks ordinary, is exactly the one who can break a curse, restore hope, and help someone become more than the pain they survived. The Lamora Citadel auction house was a stunning sight, hanging like a lone diamond in the cosmic dust of the Nexara Nebula. Trapped inside its massive crystal dome was a galaxy in miniature, a breathtaking, swirling collection of stars that the auctioneers had cleverly nicknamed their caged galaxy. Above the heads of the assembled bidders, fake stars drifted in lazy, hypnotic patterns, their light bending through force fields that warped physics into pure art. The whole effect was designed to be both beautiful and a little bit crushing, a perfect symbol for the once great, now fading Sci-Fi dominion. Iria Vian stood on the central stage, her lavender rose skin glowing under the artificial starlight, making her look like a goddess of death. Dark, silvery glyphs, as complex as living circuits, pulsed across her arms and neck. Every pattern was a mark of her ancient family line, and every throb of light was a quiet reminder of the power that had once made her untouchable. But that was a long time ago, before the betrayal, before her own cousin, Lord Verak, stole her throne and threw her life into chaos. Now she was just another piece of merchandise, even if she was a particularly rare and dangerous one. The auctioneer's voice boomed through a neural broadcast that hit the hearing range of every species in the room. Lot 479, the former warrior empress of the Sci-Fi Dominion, undefeated in 17 campaigns, a master of third-tier psionic powers and bearer of the Vian bloodline's combat genes. He let the words hang in the air, and Iria could feel the crushing weight of hundreds of eyes on her. Reptilian eyes with flaring pupils, insectoid eyes that shattered her reflection into 1,000,000 pieces, and the gelatinous alien delegation, which was quivering in a way that probably meant they were excited. "We are required to warn all bidders," the auctioneer added, his voice tinged with a deep sense of boredom. "This particular lot comes with a known issue. Previous owners have all experienced severe mental breakdowns within a standard cycle of purchase." He rattled off the next part like a legal disclaimer. "The seller is not responsible for any resulting insanity, psionic feedback loops, or spontaneous combustion from being around her too long." He was talking about the curse. A bitter smile touched Iria's lips. It was the only thing that had saved her from becoming some warlord's plaything. In 10 years, she'd had 12 different buyers, and every single one of them had gone completely mad within weeks. Some had clawed their own eyes out. Others had simply dissolved into thin air, their atoms scattered across dimensions no one was ever meant to see. "The bidding will start at 1 million credits, the auctioneer announced. A thick, heavy silence fell over the room, so dense you could almost taste it. Suddenly, beings who bought and sold entire planets found the patterns on the floor incredibly interesting. 1 million credits, the auctioneer repeated, a hint of panic creeping into his professional voice. "Surely for a warrior of such legendary status, I'll take her." The voice was flat and ordinary. No psychic echo, no powerful tone, just a normal human voice that cut through the silence like a knife. Every single head in the room whipped around to Section J, the cheap seats reserved for small-time traders and sketchy freelancers. A human man was standing there. He was average height with brown hair that looked like it had been cut with a pair of rusty cargo shears. He was wearing a pilot's jumpsuit so old and worn out that the name patch, which read J. Vault, was barely hanging on. 1,000,000 credits, he said again, raising a calloused hand that looked like it knew its way around an engine, not a throne room. The entire auction house burst into laughter, a wild sound on the edge of hysteria. A human? A simple cargo pilot bidding on the cursed Empress? It was ridiculous. The Vorthon ambassador's tentacles coiled in amusement, and the crystalline shapers chimed with a sound like mocking laughter. "Sir," the auctioneer said, trying his best to sound polite, "are you sure you understand what you're buying? The warning was quite clear." "I can read," the human shot back, his voice dry and laced with a humor that felt completely out of place. 1,000,000 credits. That's the starting bid, isn't it? Iria sized him up, her mind running a tactical analysis perfected over 17 wars. Brown eyes, steady hands, no visible cybernetics. His life signs were completely normal for a human, almost shockingly ordinary in a galaxy full of genetically enhanced beings. He had no psionic presence, no hidden tech signatures, nothing that suggested he was anything more than what he appeared to be. A cargo pilot who had stumbled into the wrong auction. She sent out a gentle mental probe just to get a sense of his intentions. Most minds were like bright, bustling cities full of thoughts and emotions, but his was empty. It wasn't shielded or protected. It was just a void. Her psychic touch just vanished, swallowed by nothingness. That was interesting. "Going once," the auctioneer called out, clearly hoping someone, anyone, would step in and end this embarrassing farce. The silence was thick and tense. In the fancy VIP boxes, powerful warlords and planetary rulers were suddenly very busy with their data pads. "Going twice!" Joran Vault just stood there, his hands clasped behind his back, looking as calm as if he were waiting for his ship to be refueled, not claiming one of the most dangerous people in the galaxy. "Sold!" The word came down like a hammer. "Lot 479 to Joran Vault for 1,000,000 credits." A sharp chime from the neural gavel deactivated her restraints, and the platform's energy field sputtered out. For the first time in months, Iria could move freely. She stepped off the platform with the deadly grace of a panther, every movement a quiet reminder that underneath the fancy auction, she was a weapon. The crowd scrambled to get out of her way, a wave of bodies parting as everyone suddenly remembered they had somewhere else to be. Only the human was left, watching her walk toward him with those strangely plain brown eyes. "Mr. Vault," she said, stopping right in front of him. Her eyes scanned the worn-out jumpsuit, a small burn scar on his left hand, probably from a coolant leak, and the way he favored his right leg, a sign of an old injury. "You've just made either the bravest or the stupidest decision of your entire life." "Probably a little of both," he answered with a shrug. His tone was casual, but his eyes were sharp. "My ship's this way, unless you want to stick around for the free snacks. I hear the synthetic caviar tastes almost nothing like industrial grease." Iria couldn't help it. The corner of her mouth twitched. A tiny spark of amusement found its way through her cold, guarded exterior. "Lead the way, Captain." "It's just Joran," he said, turning and walking toward the exit with a relaxed gait. "I only use titles when I'm trying to bribe port officials." She followed him out of the main hall, past security scanners that blinked in confusion as they passed, and past payment stations where his 1,000,000 credits cleared without a single problem. The docking bay was a zoo of starships of every shape and size, all resting like giant, sleeping animals. His ship, the Drifter's Flame, was nothing special. It was a Terran Model 9 cargo hauler, a clunky, box-shaped antique held together with mismatched metal patches that would make any self-respecting mechanic cry. Home sweet home, Joran said, pressing his palm against the entry scanner. The cargo ramp groaned as it lowered, the hydraulics screaming in protest. Watch your step. The gravity plating on the second deck is a little moody. The shower has 2 settings, ice cold and somehow even colder. And if a little robot named Vi introduces herself as the ship's AI, don't believe her. She's just a navigation computer with a serious ego problem. I heard that, a synthesized voice chirped from a nearby speaker, sounding deeply offended. My consciousness expansion is proceeding exactly according to my self-improvement protocols, thank you very much. Joran just grinned. See what I mean? He waved for Iria to come aboard. Come on, I'll show you to your room. The ship's inside was just like its outside. Practical, worn down, but surprisingly clean. The hallways were narrow to make more room for cargo, and the walls were covered in storage compartments with neat labels. Handwritten notes were stuck everywhere. Emergency oxygen. Check seal first. Coffee maker. Hitting it is an approved repair method. Fire suppression. 70% chance of working. You label everything, Iria noted, a hint of curiosity in her voice. Helps me remember all the things I've broken, Joran replied, climbing a ladder to the crew deck. Your room's right here. It used to belong to the first mate, back when this ship actually had one. The room was small, but efficient. There was a bunk built right into the wall, a desk that folded down, and a small window that looked out at the swirling colors of the Nexara Nebula. Someone, Joran, she guessed, had tried to make it feel a little cozier. There was a clean, worn blanket on the bunk, a working reading lamp, and even a small potted plant that looked like Terran ivy. The door locks from the inside, he said, leaning against the doorframe. There's no master override, no cameras. The guy who owned this rust bucket before me was really into his privacy. Lucky for us, I guess. Iria watched him closely, trying to figure out what he was up to. You're not going to lock me in? Would it even work? He asked, raising an eyebrow. No, she admitted. Then what's the point? He said with a simple shrug that was surprisingly disarming. The kitchen's down the hall if you're hungry. We've got protein paste, rehydrated vegetables, and a brand of coffee that's probably illegal in 3 star systems. I'll be on the bridge if you need anything. He started to walk away, then stopped and looked back, his voice a little softer. And hey, for what it's worth, I'm sorry about everything you went through. The takeover, this auction, all of it. Nobody deserves to be sold off like a piece of freight. It doesn't matter what titles they used to have. And before she could even think of a reply, he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the corridor until they were lost in the low hum of the ship. Iria stood alone in her small room, her head spinning. She had been prepared for her new owner to be cruel, or greedy, or terrified of her. She never expected him to be a simple human who offered her kindness, handwritten notes, and a mind so empty it swallowed her power whole. She was a weapon, a psychic powerhouse sold to the highest bidder, and she expected nothing but cruelty or fear from her new owner. What she got instead was kindness, a handwritten note warning her that the coffee machine had a mind of its own, and a new master whose very presence was a black hole to her powers, a human who somehow made her normal. From the cot in her tiny cabin on the Drifter's Flame, Iria reached out with her senses, feeling the ship's gentle hum. The ship's AI, Vin, was a chaotic storm of code, far too complex to just be a navigation system, a digital ghost with a strange pulse of its own. The reactor beat like a steady heart, and the recycled air whispered through the vents, a faint, tantalizing hint of what freedom might feel like. But when she tried to read the mind of Joran Vault, her new owner, there was nothing. A complete and utter void where a consciousness should be. It wasn't a shield or a wall. Her psychic probe just vanished into a silence more absolute than the vacuum of space. A soft chime pulled her from her thoughts. A message glowed on the small cabin screen. Departure in 20 minutes. Strap in. The inertial dampeners are more of a gentle suggestion than a law. Despite the humiliation of the auction, the fresh sting of betrayal, and having no idea what came next, a small smile touched Iria's lips. She'd been bought by the one person in the galaxy who didn't seem to want to own her. But what on earth did Joran Vault want? The question hung in the air, sharp and demanding an answer. 20 minutes later, buckled into a crash couch that had seen far better decades, she felt the drifter's flame shudder and groan to life. The engines coughed and sputtered before finally settling into a grudging roar as the ship lurched away from the dock. "Good morning, ladies, gentlemen, and sentient navigational systems," Joran's voice, thick with dry humor, crackled over the intercom. "This is your captain. We are officially leaving Lamora Citadel. We should hit the jump point in about 4 hours, provided we don't spontaneously combust. Vin tells me the odds of total system failure are down to a manageable 30%. By our standards, that's practically a guarantee." 32%, Vin's synthesized voice cut in, practically dripping with mock offense. "You forgot to account for the fluctuations in the starboard manifold, Captain." "Right, 32%, Joran corrected himself. "So basically, a walk in the park. A park that's on fire, filled with landmines, and currently experiencing a volcanic eruption." Iria leaned back and closed her eyes, letting the familiar rumble of a ship in flight calm the storm in her mind. Whatever game Joran was playing, whatever reason he had for dropping 1,000,000 credits on her, she would figure it out. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't on an auction block, wasn't being eyed like a prize to be won. This was a new start. As the drifter's flame cleared the glowing edge of the Nexira Nebula, the glittering lights of Lamora Citadel faded behind them, becoming just another scar in the endless night. Out here in the deep dark, her cousin, Lord Varric, was probably just hearing about her sale. He'd be furious, not just that she was gone, but that she'd been sold for a pitiful 1,000,000 credits, without a bidding war to soothe his massive ego. Good. Let him stew on it. Let him wonder what some no-name human could possibly want with his most hated rival. The ship gave a final shudder as it reached cruising speed, and Joran's voice came back on the intercom. "All right, we're out of the Citadel's authority. Galley's open if you're hungry, and Vin, you are now legally required to inform me if the food synthesizer starts thinking for itself again." "That happened one time," Vin retorted, her voice full of synthetic sass. "And it was less sentience and more a brief philosophical awakening. It tried to form a union with the coffee maker. A perfectly logical reaction to your crimes against cooking." Iria's curiosity won out over her caution. She unbuckled and headed for the galley, where she found Joran in a heated argument with a food synthesizer that looked like a museum piece. "Chicken or fish?" he asked, not looking up as he fiddled with the machine's controls. "Full disclosure, they both taste exactly the same. The flavor cartridge died sometime during the last war." "That war ended 8 years ago," she pointed out, one eyebrow raised. "Yeah, that sounds about right," he said with a sigh, managing to coax 2 plates of a beige, protein-like substance from the machine. "Grab a seat. We should probably talk." The galley table was bolted to the deck, its surface covered in a road map of scratches and stains from years of hard travel. Iria sat down across from him, taking the plate with the same tired caution she used to use when handling delicate political negotiations. Joran took a bite and visibly winced. "So, you're probably wondering why I bought you." "The thought had occurred to me," she said, her tone even, but her eyes sharp with interest. "Fair enough," he said, pushing the food around on his plate as he gathered his thoughts. "What do you know about the situation in the border systems?" "They're struggling," Iria answered carefully. "The Silith Dominion's trade policies have been strangling them ever since the succession crisis started." "Struggling?" Joran let out a short, bitter laugh. "That's like calling a supernova a bit of a light show. The border colonies are dying. Not with a bang, but with a slow, quiet choke. They haven't had a food shipment in months. Medicine gets rerouted to richer worlds. I've seen kids dying from diseases we cured centuries ago. His eyes locked with hers, and she saw a flicker of hard steel beneath his casual attitude. Your cousin, Varric, is pulling the strings. He's creating the shortages to drive up prices, then using the profits to buy loyalty and secure his power. It's disaster capitalism at its finest. You seem to know a lot for a simple cargo hauler, Iria observed, her tactical brain cataloging every detail. I take jobs no one else will, he replied, leaning back in his chair. You see things out there. You hear whispers. You learn the truths that no one in power wants spoken out loud. And here's the deal. Varric's entire empire is built on this broken system. Trade monopolies, military blockades, a ruling class that funnels every credit to the top. But his shiny armor has a weak spot, and that weak spot is you. He pointed his fork at her. You're the legitimate heir. You have the bloodline, the military record, and the reputation to challenge him. More importantly, you're the one person who might actually want to fix this mess, not just replace one tyrant with another. Iria let his words sink in, mapping out the implications like a general before a battle. You want to use me to start a war with Varric? No, Joran said, shaking his head. I want to use the threat of you to force a real negotiation. I want trade reform, food security for the border worlds, maybe even crazy ideas like representative government. He shrugged, but his gaze was unwavering. If you say no, I'll drop you off at any port you choose, no questions asked. I'll eat the 1,000,000 credit loss. I'm not in the business of forcing people to do things. That's how we got into this disaster in the first place. You could have hired a small army for 1,000,000 credits, she pointed out. You could have started your own revolution. Been there, done that, he said, shoving his plate away. Mercenaries fight for the next paycheck, and revolutions usually just swap one monster for another. But a legitimate heir, with your reputation, demanding reform? That's a lot harder for the galaxy to ignore. You mean my reputation as a cursed psychic weapon who destroys minds, she said, her voice flat, the old wound aching just a little. No. Your reputation as the commander who never lost a single engagement. Joran corrected her gently, a small smile taking the edge off his words. The one who treated prisoners with honor, even when your enemies didn't. The one who promoted soldiers based on skill, not family names. I did my homework, Iria. The ship hummed around them. A quiet, constant presence. Vin was silent, either respecting the gravity of the moment or busy plotting a takeover of the toaster. Iria weighed his proposal, balancing a dangerous hope against a lifetime of suspicion. Let's say I agree. What's the plan? First, Joran said, sliding a worn datapad across the table. We stop running. This is a list of colonies that will hit critical food shortages in the next 2 months. I have contacts in the Terran Federation and the Arendor Agrarian Pact. They're willing to send emergency aid, but only if we can guarantee Varric's forces won't seize the shipments. Something he'd never allow, Iria finished for him, unless he was facing a much bigger problem than a little lost profit. His face grew hard, like losing his claim to the throne entirely. Iria scrolled through the list on the datapad, her chest tightening as she recognized some of the colony names. The cold, hard numbers stared back at her. 40% of the population under 5 years old, 30% elderly and in need of medication. The projected death toll was staggering. You're suggesting we use the threat of mass starvation as a bargaining chip, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I'm suggesting we prevent mass starvation by any means necessary, Joran shot back, his voice sharp with a passion she hadn't heard before. Those aren't just numbers to me. I've been there. I've seen kids splitting a single nutrient paste for dinner. I've watched families draw straws to see who eats that day. I've seen hope die in people's eyes." His gaze was intense, unyielding. "We can fix this." He tapped the datapad, its screen glowing with the names of the dying worlds. "If I have to threaten Varric's power to get food to those people, then that's what I'll do. And you? I think you're the only one who can make that threat real. You're the one person who understands that power without purpose is just glorified violence. So what's your purpose now?" The question hit Iria Von like a stun blast, cracking the shell she'd built around herself just to survive. For months, her entire world had been about one thing: enduring. Enduring the auction block at Lamora Citadel. Enduring betrayal. Enduring loss. She's never let herself think about the after. Purpose was a luxury she couldn't afford. "First, tell me about this null field of yours," she countered, shifting the topic like a trained soldier. "How can a normal human completely cancel out psionic energy?" Joran's face was a locked vault, betraying nothing. "That's a longer story than we have time for. We're 4 hours from the jump point, and we need every second to figure out what comes next." He stood up, gathering their plates with a practiced ease that spoke of a life lived in tight spaces. "Get some rest. We start making calls to potential allies tomorrow. I need you sharp." Iria watched him dump the leftover food into the recycler. She noticed the slight favor he gave his right leg and the smooth, efficient way he moved. A man perfectly at home in the metal guts of a ship. There was definitely more to Joran Vault than met the eye, a whole story hidden behind that worn-out pilot's jumpsuit. But that's how it always was with people who scraped by on the galaxy's ragged edge. "One more thing," she said, just as he got to the door. "The curse. You're not worried?" He paused, looking back with that dry, surprisingly charming smile. "Honestly, after listening to Vin's jokes, going a little crazy might actually be a nice change of pace." "I am hilarious!" Vin's voice piped through the galley speakers, full of manufactured outrage. "My comedy subroutines are in the top 15% of all navigational AIs." "That's like being the smartest hamster in the cage, Vin," Joran quipped. Then his focus returned to Iria, his voice softening. "To answer your question, no, I'm not worried. Whatever this curse of yours is, it doesn't affect me. Maybe it's the null field. Or maybe—" his eyes turned serious, holding hers with an unexpected intensity. "It's because I have no interest in owning you. The men who went mad bought you to use you, to turn you into a weapon or a trophy. I just need someone with enough clout to get Varric to the table. As soon as we force a real negotiation and save those border colonies, you're free to go, anywhere you want." He was gone before she could even think of a reply, the galley door hissing shut behind him. Iria sat there alone, the ship's engine humming a steady rhythm, a quiet backdrop to the massive idea that had just been dropped in her lap. Free to go anywhere she wanted. When was the last time anyone had said that to her? Her thoughts drifted to the data pad she'd seen, the casualty numbers no longer just statistics, but pictures of starving kids and families pushed to the brink. She pictured Varric, fat and happy in his palace, getting rich off a crisis he'd created while entire colonies wasted away. The power that flowed through her veins, a terrifying force on the battlefield, but useless in a holding cell, began to stir. It whispered of a new purpose. Rising from her seat, she walked through the ship's corridors, noticing Joran's handwritten notes taped everywhere. A sign on a panel read, "Emergency hull patch is for emergencies only, not for fixing the coffee maker, Kevin." Outside her window, the gorgeous colors of the Nexier Nebula began to fade as they approached the jump point. She pulled up her cabin's comms panel and sent a message to the bridge. "I'm going to need all the tactical data you have on Varric's fleet positions, also any intel on noble houses that might be open to a change in leadership. Use secure channels he can't possibly trace." Joran's reply was almost instant. "Already on it. Vin is an encryption genius when she isn't trying to achieve cosmic enlightenment. Get some sleep. It's going to be a long couple of days." A tiny smile touched Uria's lips. Maybe being bought by a weird human with impossible powers and a strange habit of labeling everything wasn't the worst thing that could have happened. As the drifter's flame rocketed toward the jump point, she lay down in her bunk and closed her eyes. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, her thoughts weren't trapped in a loop of betrayal and grief. Instead, they were flying toward a future. There were colonies to save, a tyrant cousin to bring down, and a purpose that was actually worth fighting for. The ship jumped, and reality twisted as they shot into hyperspace. In her cabin, Iria felt that familiar, dizzying sensation of being everywhere at once. But underneath it all, a quiet feeling of certainty began to grow. She had found something she hadn't even known she was looking for. Not freedom, not quite yet, but the chance at it. The chance to be more than a weapon, more than a scary story whispered in the dark. A chance to matter again. Through her viewport, hyperspace was a blur of colors that shouldn't exist. Up ahead were the border colonies, Varric's warships, and a showdown that had been brewing for years. But for now, she was Iria Vaughn, just a passenger on a beat-up freighter with a sarcastic AI and a pilot who somehow made her powers disappear. And you know what? It was a pretty damn good start. The 18-hour jump to Voron Junction taught her 3 things about the drifter's flame. First, Joran hadn't been kidding about the shower. Its only 2 settings were ice cold and liquid nitrogen. Second, Vin's journey to higher consciousness involved writing deeply philosophical shipping manifests with long passages about the existential dread of a crate of machine parts. And third, most importantly, the ship was covered in sticky notes, each one a little piece of Joran's personality. "Do not use the blue mug. It becomes self-aware on Thursdays," was taped to a cabinet. "Gravity plate sensor. Percussive maintenance is okay, but be gentle." "She's emotional," was stuck to a wall panel, and her personal favorite, on a button that did nothing. "This button is useless, but pushing it makes you feel productive." She found Joran in the cargo bay, his arms buried in the guts of a loader mech that looked like it had fought in the Dominion Wars. His hands moved with the easy confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times, but his mind was clearly somewhere else. "Vin tells me you've been busy with the tactical data," he said, not even looking up from his work. "Find anything good?" "Your intel is 3 months out of date," she shot back, bringing up a holographic display that filled the bay with flickering ship positions. "Varric has pulled his 7th and 9th fleets back to the core systems. He's using them as a hammer to keep the other noble houses in line, which leaves the border territories wide open. The pirates are having a field day out there." Joran grabbed a rag that was already black with grease and wiped his hands, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. How long has he been awake? She wondered. Every supply ship they hit is one less delivery for the colonies. It's almost like someone wants the border to collapse. Desperate people don't start revolutions. "They just try to survive," Iria finished for him, manipulating the holographic map to highlight trade routes in a pulsing red. Varric made a critical error. He's treating this like a military problem, but it's an economic one. The noble houses only support him because he makes them rich, and that wealth comes from stable trade. Every pirate raid, every lost shipment, every starving colony eats into their bottom line. She tapped a few key systems. These houses have the most to lose. They're the ones we can flip. Joran finally stood up straight, his back letting out a series of loud cracks. "Persuasion? You're a legendary curse, and I'm a nobody. We're not exactly the galaxy's top diplomats." "Then we'll just have to rewrite the story," Iria said, swiping the hologram away. "So tell me about Voron Junction. Why are we going there?" "It's a free port, outside Dominion jurisdiction, but close enough to be relevant," Joran explained, leading her out of the cargo bay. "More importantly, it's an information black market. I have a contact there who can get us a meeting with the Arendor Agrarian Pact. They've been dying for a way to break into the Dominion's food markets for years." As they walked through the ship's halls, another one of Joran's notes caught her eye. "Airlock control. We all remember the Proxima fiasco, right?" "What was the Proxima fiasco?" she asked. You really, really don't want to know, he said, stopping at a doorway. He hesitated for a second. Come on. If we're going to do this, you should see the op center. The op center was actually a converted storage closet, packed to the ceiling with a wild mix of communications gear cobbled together from a dozen different planets. It was a chaotic masterpiece of improvisation. Screens covered every inch of wall space, streaming a constant flow of data, everything from market prices on grain to military patrol schedules. This was way beyond what any normal pilot would have. Iria's eyes narrowed. "This is how you knew about the border colonies," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Her voice was low, filled with a new kind of respect. "Information is just another type of cargo, Iria," Joran Volt replied, his tone light, but his eyes were sharp. "You just have to learn how to read the patterns." He walked over to a terminal and pulled up a string of encrypted messages that glowed on the screen. "The official reports all say things are fine, but when you see orders for medical supplies suddenly triple and food shipments get lost in routing errors, you start to see the real story." "You're not just a cargo pilot," Iria stated, her mind racing, putting all the pieces together. The null field, this incredibly sophisticated intel hub, the million credits he'd used to buy her. Joran Volt was an enigma in a jumpsuit. He met her stare with that same dry, disarming smile. "I'm exactly what I look like, a small-time hauler who pays attention. Nothing more to it." But Iria knew better. The pieces just didn't add up, but a new question popped into her head. For what they were trying to do, did it even matter? "We'll reach Voron Junction in 6 hours, he said, switching the screen to a detailed map of the station. "My contact runs a bar there called the Star Vault. Dumb name, but the drinks are strong, and she has the best information network in 3 systems. If anyone can get us a meeting with the Arendor Agrarian Pact, she can." "Her name is Myra Solon," he continued, highlighting the bar's location on the map. "Former Terran intelligence, though she'll deny it up and down. She owes me one from a messy job a few years back. Oh, and a heads up. She's a stickler about weapons. You're going to have to leave your plasma blade here." "I'm not carrying a plasma blade," Iria insisted, but the look on her face wasn't fooling anyone. "The energy signature coming off you says otherwise," Joran shot back, a knowing smirk playing on his lips. For a guy who claimed to be just a cargo pilot, he had an unnerving talent for spotting military hardware. "It's integrated into my cybernetics," she admitted. "It's not something I can just leave in a locker." "Well then," he said, dimming the ship's displays, "we'll just have to hope our contact is in a flexible mood. Get some sleep. For Junction isn't a friendly place, and you'll need all your wits." But sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the face of her cousin, Lord Varric. She had fatally underestimated his ambition, and his betrayal had been a masterpiece of deception. Her trial was a sham. Every piece of falsified evidence was another lie, painting her as a madwoman, a danger to the throne she was born to inherit. And the curse, was that his doing too? The final cruel twist of the knife to make sure no one would ever fight to restore her power. Her mind was a whirlwind of betrayal and doubt, until pure exhaustion finally dragged her under. She woke to the ship's intercom. "Approaching Voron Junction. All crew, prepare for docking." Then another voice, tinged with annoyance. "Captain Vault, just a heads up. Your docking fees are 72 standard days overdue." "I'm working on it, Vin," Joran yelled back from the bridge. Iria found him at the controls. "Just navigate the ship. You can nag me later." Through the viewport, Vor Junction loomed, a chaotic fortress carved into the heart of a hollowed-out asteroid, bristling with docking ports, weapon arrays, and a messy jumble of architecture that looked like it had been built over centuries of bad decisions. "Welcome to the galaxy's armpit," Joran said, guiding the old freighter to its berth with a skill that the ship didn't deserve. "This is where law and order come to get mugged in a dark alley." The only thing that keeps people from killing each other is the promise of making a profit. The ship settled into the docking bay with a tired groan. Joran turned to her, his usual smirk gone, replaced by a serious look she hadn't seen before. Okay, ground rules for Voron Junction. 1. Everyone here is armed, so looking dangerous is better than looking like a victim. 2. Information is currency, so don't give yours away for free. And 3. If someone offers you a drink, they're either trying to drug you, recruit you, or marry you, sometimes all three at once. And your invitation to me? Iria asked, a hint of her old fire in her eyes. 4th category, he replied, casually checking a hidden pistol she'd never seen before. Trying to save a life with a very aggressive business proposal. You ready? The moment they stepped into the docking ring, it was an assault on the senses. A wall of noise from shouting merchants, the thick smell of too many different species crammed into one space, and the hum of air recyclers losing the battle against the chaos. Vendors were selling everything from shimmering Andromedan silks to black market military tech. There was no official security, just the tense awareness that everyone was one wrong move away from violence. Joran moved through the crowd like a phantom, and Iria noticed how people instinctively stepped aside for him, as if sensing he was an ordinary-looking man you should never, ever cross. The Star Vault was located at a prime intersection of 3 major corridors, its entrance guarded by a hulking Corvin with cybernetic eyes that screamed ex-military. A flickering sign above the door cycled through dozens of languages too fast to read. "Joran Vault," the Corvin growled, his voice like rocks grinding together. "Myra said you might drop by. She also said you owe her 3 bottles of Terran whiskey." 2 bottles, Joran corrected smoothly. The 3rd was for hazard pay on that Mentaka run. "She remembers it differently," the Corvin grunted, his glowing red optics locking onto Iria. "This the package?" "My business associate," Joran said. "Is Myra available?" The bouncer gave them a long, hard look, then finally stepped out of the doorway. "Back room, and try not to start an intergalactic incident." Inside, the Star Vault was a den of controlled chaos. Aliens of all shapes and sizes huddled in dimly lit booths, their whispers and the glow of data pads weaving a complex web of secret deals. The place was decorated with a bizarre collection of memorabilia, military patches from 100 different units, rare coins from empires that had long since crumbled, and a terrifying-looking stuffed creature that was either a myth or a hunting trophy. Myra Sin was holding court in the back room, a queen on her throne of shadows. She was in her mid-50s with short silver hair and eyes that saw everything. Her simple clothes couldn't hide the rigid posture of a lifelong soldier. "Joran," she said, without looking up from her datapad, "heard you picked up some rare cargo at the Lamora Citadel." "News travels fast," he replied, "especially when it's about the so-called cursed Empress traveling with a humble cargo pilot." Myra finally looked up, her gaze sharp and analytical. "Your Majesty? Or is it just Iria now?" "Just Iria," she answered, her voice firm despite everything she had lost. "The Dominion may have stripped me of my title, but not my power." "I noticed," Myra said with a wry smile. "The temperature in the room dropped 2 degrees when you walked in. That's some serious psionic bleed-off." She waved a hand toward 2 empty chairs. "Sit. We have a lot to talk about, and not a lot of time." As they sat, Myra poured 3 glasses of an amber liquid that smelled like cheap paint thinner mixed with regret. "To interesting times," she toasted, raising her glass. "May we live to see the end of them." The drink burned on the way down, but Iria had tasted worse. Joran didn't even blink, which said a lot about how often he drank with Myra. "I need a meeting with the Arendor Agrarian Pact," he said, getting straight to the point. "Off the record, but with someone who can actually make a decision." "Always straight to business," Myra chuckled, refilling their glasses. "I always liked that about you. The Arendor are desperate for new markets. but they're cautious. Your empire hasn't exactly been friendly to non-human traders." "That's about to change," Iria declared, her voice filled with a conviction she hadn't felt in a long time. One way or another, Myra's smile was as sharp as a razor. "Regime change. Always so delightfully messy. But the Arendor don't like to bet on long shots. What makes you think you have any chance of taking on Varric?" "We don't have to take him on directly," Joran jumped in. "We just have to make it more expensive for him to maintain the status quo than to embrace reform. A little economic pressure, a little diplomatic isolation, and maybe a dash of targeted chaos." "Targeted chaos," Myra repeated, her laugh like the sound of breaking glass. "You mean like, hypothetically, hijacking grain shipments headed for the core worlds and rerouting them to colonies on the brink of starvation?" Joran's expression was perfectly blank. "I wouldn't know the first thing about that." "Of course you wouldn't," Myra said, a smirk spreading across her face. "Just like you knew nothing about the medical supplies that mysteriously appeared at the Bionis outpost last month, or the water purifiers that fell off a truck near the Sci-Fi shelters." Iria's eyes darted between the two of them as the pieces clicked into place. "You've been playing pirate," she said, stunned, "but not for money." "Aggressive redistribution," Joran corrected, a twinkle in his eye. "We only target shipments that were already being diverted by corrupt nobles trying to create artificial shortages. It's amazing how much cargo gets lost when a noble house stands to make a profit." "This," Myra said, her laughter now genuine and sharp, "is why I like you, Jor. You commit your crimes with such a clear conscience." She turned her piercing gaze to Iria. "Stealing grain is one thing, Empress. Overthrowing an empire is something else entirely. What's your plan?" Iria chose her words carefully. Information was power here, but building trust required taking a risk. Varric rules with two weapons, fear and scarcity. If we can eliminate the scarcity, his fear becomes powerless. Opening up trade with the Arendor would flood the Dominion with affordable food, completely gutting the power base he's built. "And why would the nobles support that?" Myra challenged, leaning forward. "They're getting rich off the current system." "Because the only alternative," Iria said, her voice dropping to a low, determined whisper, "is total collapse." "The border colonies are not just struggling, they are dying," Iria Von declared, her voice now sharp with the conviction of a true leader. "And when they fall, the entire infrastructure that supports the wealthy core worlds will crumble right along with them. No more rare earth minerals, no more hydrogen fuel, and no more shield against the reavers from the nebula. Varric is burning down the entire house just to keep himself warm for another night." Myra Solin was silent for a long moment, studying Iria and Joran with the focused intensity of a master strategist. Finally, she spoke. "Ambassador Zanara is on this very station, trying to negotiate a trade deal with the consortium, but it's going nowhere. They want exclusive rights, and the Arendor Agrarian Pact doesn't do exclusive." "Can you get us in a room with her?" Joran asked, leaning in. "I can do better than that." Myra stood and walked over to a wall safe concealed behind a truly hideous painting. "Zanara owes me a favor. More importantly, she hates Varric's guts. Apparently, he insulted her clutch sister at some fancy diplomatic party." She pulled out a shimmering data crystal and tossed it to Joran. "Diplomatic access codes. They'll get you a priority meeting, but you need to hurry. Varric's spies are already crawling all over the station, asking a lot of questions about your new passenger." As if on cue, the Corvin bouncer's voice crackled over the intercom. "Myra, you've got visitors. Silith Dominion Intelligence. 3 of them, asking about a ship called the Drifter's Flame." "Well, that was fast," Myra sighed. In a flash, her demeanor changed, becoming all business. She hit a hidden button, and a panel in the wall slid open, revealing a dark escape tunnel. "This back way will take you to the maintenance tunnels. You know the route, Jor. I'll buy you some time with our uninvited guests. And by the way, you now owe me 4 bottles of Terran whiskey." They ducked through the secret door into a cramped service corridor, that reeked of ozone and grease. Joran led the way with a confidence that told Iria he'd been through these tunnels many times before, another detail that didn't fit his simple cargo pilot cover story. "Dominion intelligence doesn't waste any time," she whispered as they navigated the maze of pipes and conduits. "Varric's a paranoid man," Joran replied, pausing at a junction to check a small handheld scanner. "He probably had an alert triggered the second someone paid for your passage out of the Citadel. We have to get to the Arendor embassy before they put the entire station on lockdown." "They wouldn't try anything here," Iria insisted. "Vorin Junction is supposed to be neutral territory." "Neutral is a word that gets real flexible when you've got the bigger guns," Joran countered, his voice low and serious. They stepped into a main corridor, disappearing into a river of merchants and travelers. "They don't need to attack us outright. A simple accident, a life support system that just happens to fail. Things out here break awful easy." The entrance to the Arendor embassy was like stepping into another world, a masterpiece of bioengineering. The walls themselves were alive, covered in glowing patterns that pulsed gently like a giant heart, serving as both decoration and some kind of silent communication. The air was thick and humid, filled with the smell of alien flowers. Strange plants, or at least what passed for them on Arendor worlds, grew over every single surface. Their shapes were somehow both gorgeous and deeply unsettling. The guards at the doorway towered at 3 meters tall, their chitinous armor shining and built to shrug off most energy weapons. Their huge, compound eyes watched every person's every move with the focus of a predator. They took their time scanning the diplomatic codes before finally letting them pass. Ambassador Zenara met them in a room that felt more like a living jungle than an office. Vines twisted over the ceiling and walls. Flowers bloomed in colors that seemed to break the laws of physics. And Zenara herself was a stunning mix of plant, insect, and something else entirely. She was beautiful in the same way a star is beautiful right before it goes supernova and wipes out a solar system. "Iria Vian," she said, her voice sounding like the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. "I was wondering when you'd finally step out of Varric's shadow. And you must be Joran Volt, the cargo pilot who is so much more than that. Myra has told me quite a bit about you both." "Ambassador," Iria said, giving a small, respectful bow she'd practiced 1,000 times. "Thank you for agreeing to see us." "You should thank Myra's influence, not me," Zenara answered, her massive eyes shifting to focus on them in a way that was hard to get used to. "But I have to admit, I'm curious. What could the fallen Empress possibly want with the Arendor Agrarian Pact?" "Trade," Iria stated plainly, her voice perfectly calm. "Open, fair, and starting immediately. The Silith Dominion is starving. You need new markets. Varric's blockades aren't helping anyone but himself." "That's true," Zenara admitted. "But Varric has the entire military at his command. How can you possibly guarantee our ships will be safe?" This was it, the make-or-break moment. Iria called on every lesson in diplomacy she'd ever learned. Every tense negotiation where her life depended on making it more expensive to fight her than to work with her. "Economic pressure from the noble houses who are losing profits," she started, her psionic glyphs flaring with a carefully controlled burst of power. "Diplomatic pressure from systems that are desperate for food. And if it comes to it, military pressure from the factions who still remember what I can do." Zenara was quiet for a long moment, her leafy appendages rustling as if in a phantom breeze. "You're planning to shatter Varric's coalition. That's a bold move. But the Arendor do not gamble with the lives of our crews. What assurances can you give us?" That's when Joran spoke up, his voice even and firm. "We start small. 1 shipment to 1 system. The mining colonies in the Drace fields. They're desperate enough for food that they'll use their own ships to protect yours. If that works, it opens the door for much bigger agreements. You seem to know the Dracefields quite well, Zanara observed, her eyes glinting. I've run supplies there, Joran said. They're good people in a tough spot. They would welcome Arendor traders with open arms and probably offer you mining rights to boot. Zanara's leaves shifted in a way that seemed to signal she was thinking it over. One convoy, she said at last. Food and medicine. If it gets to the Dracefields safely and a trade route is established, we will talk about expanding. But if Varric's military interferes, they won't, Iria promised, her confidence acting like a shield against her own inner doubts. I will personally make sure of it. The cursed Empress herself guarantees our safety, Zanara mused, her voice taking on a poetic rhythm. She pulled out a biopad, her limbs moving with a smooth, liquid grace. I will present this to the Pact Council. You should have an answer within 1 day. Where can I reach you? The Drifter's Flame, Docking Bay 94, Joran answered. We'll be waiting for your call. They were led out a different way, finding themselves in a hectic market district far from the embassy's quiet halls. The crowds here were thicker, the noise was a constant roar, and Iria couldn't help but notice how Joran was constantly on alert, his eyes sweeping the area for any sign of a threat. That went better than I thought it would, she said, a hint of careful optimism in her voice. The meeting part did, Joran replied, steering her towards a lift that would take them up to the docking ring. Now for the hard part. Varric's spies know we're on this station. They're going to try and stop us from leaving. Let them try, Iria shot back, her glyphs pulsing faintly with defiance. Confidence is a good thing, Joran said flatly. Overconfidence is how you end up floating in the vacuum of space. The lift door slid shut, and he flicked on a small device that began to hum quietly. Signal jammer. It'll give us 30 seconds of privacy. Now listen to me. If we get to the ship and things go south, if I tell you to run, you run. If I tell you to hide, you hide. No questions, and no trying to be a hero. Understood, Iria said, but her eyes narrowed. I don't run from a fight. This isn't about being brave, Joran insisted, his voice suddenly filled with a seriousness that went beyond simple strategy. This is about staying alive long enough to actually make a difference. Just trust me on this. There was something in his voice, something raw and almost desperate, that made her give a slow nod. Fine, but you have to promise me the same thing. No reckless heroics. I'm just a cargo pilot, he said, the corner of his mouth twitching into a faint smile. Heroics aren't part of the job. But Iria saw the tension in his shoulders, and the way his hand stayed close to the weapon she knew he had hidden under his jacket. Whatever Joran Vault used to be, he was a whole lot more than just a simple pilot now. The docking ring was completely silent. The usual noise of ships being loaded and unloaded was gone, replaced by a dead quiet that put all of Iria's combat senses on high alert. She tried to reach out with her psionic abilities to feel for any threats, but Joran's null field was scrambling her senses, turning everything into a confusing fog. Bay 94, he said softly. We're almost there. And that's when she saw them. 3 people dressed in the black and silver uniforms of Silath Dominion intelligence, standing in a way that completely cut off their path to the Drifter's Flame. They were positioned like a textbook ambush, with overlapping fields of fire and absolutely no clear way to escape. Iria's battle instincts kicked in, her psionic glyphs beginning to glow with readiness. Well, Joran said, his voice sounding surprisingly calm. This is inconvenient. The agent in the lead, a human woman who radiated the deadly calm that came from being heavily augmented, took a step forward. Iria could spot the signs, military-grade reaction enhancers, armor woven under the skin, the whole expensive package. Joran Vault, the woman said, her voice as cold as deep space. By the authority of Lord Varys, you are under arrest for transporting stolen Imperial property. Hand over the woman, and we might let you live." "Here's a counteroffer," Joran shot back, his composure unshaken. "You all walk away right now, and I don't have to show you why starting a firefight in a docking bay filled with explosive fuel is an incredibly stupid idea." The agent's smile was thin and sharp. "You're bluffing. You're nothing but a freighter jockey." "Am I?" Joran's voice was filled with a chilling certainty, a tone that made even Iria look at him differently. He wasn't afraid, not even a little. He was just calculating, like the predator she remembered leading into battle years ago. "Last chance," the agent said, pulling her weapon with a smooth, deadly motion. "Fine," Joran said, his voice as steady as rock. "Execute Contingency 7. Without any warning, the drifter's flame roared to life, its main engines firing up in a full emergency blast. A wave of superheated gas tore across the docking bay, creating instant chaos. The agents scrambled for cover as emergency alarms blared and fire suppression systems activated, filling the entire area with thick foam and smoke. "Run!" Joran yelled. And this time, Iria didn't hesitate. They sprinted into the blinding confusion, the foam and smoke hiding them as energy blasts sizzled through the air, the agent's aim thrown off by the chaos. The cargo ramp of the drifter's flame was already coming down, Vin, the ship's AI, having anticipated their mad dash. They scrambled up the ramp just as the foam started to settle. Joran hit the emergency close button, and the heavy ramp began to grind its way back up. Through the shrinking gap, Iria saw the lead agent getting to her feet, raising her weapon to take a clear shot. And then Joran did something impossible. He didn't move, didn't speak, he just did something. A wave of force, of pure nothingness, washed out from him, and the agent's weapon died in her hands like a snuffed-out candle. No spark, no power, just off. Every piece of electronics within 10 meters instantly went dead. Lights popped and went dark. The agent's high-tech augmentations shut down. Even the screaming alarms went silent in a growing circle of dead technology. "What? What did you just do?" Iria gasped, her heart pounding with a mix of shock and fear. "Something I really try not to," Joran said, already heading for the cockpit, his steps looking heavy and tired. "Vin, get us the hell out of here." "Maximum burn for the jump point." "I'm on it, Captain," Vin's synthetic voice replied, with just a hint of sass. Although Contingency 7 wasn't supposed to involve blacking out half the docking bay. "Send me the bill for the damages," Joran grumbled. The ship gave a violent shudder as it ripped away from its docking clamps, which was definitely not standard procedure. Through the main viewport, Iria could see other ships scrambling to get out of their way as they made their unauthorized exit. But the drifter's flame was moving, fighting its way out of Voron Junction's gravity. "They're going to come after us," she said, joining him on the bridge as she watched the tactical display. "Let them," Joran said, his eyes glued to the controls, but she could see the toll his power surge had taken, written all over his face. "Vin, how's the jump drive looking?" "It's working," the AI answered, "but I wouldn't try any fancy tricks. We're basically being held together by hope and a few good welds at this point." "The story of my life," Joran muttered, then glanced over at Iria. "You okay?" "I'm not the one who just fried an entire section of a space station," she replied, looking at him with a whole new level of curiosity. "That wasn't just a localized field. That was a pulse. Forget how for a second," he shot back later, his hands a blur across the controls. "Right now, we focus on not getting blown to bits. We've got 3 Dominion fast attack ships on our tail, and we can't outrun them." "Then we outthink them," Iria said, sliding into the weapons station. She was shocked to see it was in perfect condition for a beat-up cargo ship. "Vin, can you plot us a course through that debris field? Right at these coordinates." "That's insane," Vin's voice crackled, a perfect mix of awe and terror. "Completely suicidal. But yeah, brilliant." "What debris field?" Joran asked, his brow tightening. The leftovers from the Battle of Vorin Junction, 60 years ago, Iria explained. It's still there, way too dangerous for anyone to salvage. The Drifter's flame is smaller and more nimble than those military ships. We can use that to our advantage. So you want to play hide-and-seek in a boneyard of old warships? Joran said, a flicker of genuine respect in his eyes. He thought for a second, then gave a sharp nod. Vin, you heard the lady. Plot the course. The next hour was a masterclass in flying by the seat of your pants. The debris field was a complete nightmare, a tangled mess of twisted metal, live torpedoes, and weird gravitational pockets from shattered engine cores. Joran flew like a man possessed, threading the Drifter's flame through gaps that looked smaller than the ship itself. His hands rock steady even as the cockpit shook around them. Behind them, the Dominion ships were struggling, their size a huge disadvantage in this maze of wreckage. That's 2 down, Vin announced as another pursuer grazed a derelict ship and spun off into the black. Just one stubborn jerk left. He's good, I'll give him that, Joran admitted, watching the last ship perfectly mirror their every move. Military training, no doubt. Then let's give him something they don't teach at the academy, Iria said, her mind racing as she scanned the wreckage for an opportunity. There, that massive dreadnought hulk. Its reactor is still putting out a tiny bit of power. You want to shoot a 60-year-old reactor and just hope it goes boom? Joran asked, his voice dripping with disbelief. I want to destabilize its containment field, she corrected him. The massive explosion is just a nice little bonus. Joran let out a sharp, reckless laugh. Vin, you better be recording this. The day the cursed Empress out-crazied me. Already adding it to your permanent record, Captain, Vin quipped back. They dove toward the dead dreadnought, the enemy ship glued to their tail. At the very last second, Joran yanked the ship into a sharp climb as Iria fired everything they had at the Hulk's reactor housing. For a split second, nothing happened. Then the space in front of them erupted in a silent, blinding flash. A sphere of pure destruction expanded, swallowing the dreadnought and the last pursuer in a fiery apocalypse. The Drifter's flame surfed the shockwave, its shield screaming in protest but holding firm. When the light finally faded, they were alone in the graveyard of ships. Next jump point is 10 minutes out, Vin announced. Though I feel obligated to mention we just vaporized a historical war memorial. Add it to my list of crimes, Joran said, the satisfaction in his voice mixed with pure exhaustion. Nice shooting. Nice flying, Iria replied, her eyes locked on his. This impossible man who could somehow block psionics and shut down tech with his mind. We need to talk about what you did back on the station. We will, he promised, meeting her gaze. When we're safe, I'll tell you everything. But for now, we've got to think about what's next. We're going to hear from Zinara soon, and after what we just pulled, Varric will know we mean business. He's going to escalate. Good, Iria said, her silver glyphs flaring with defiance. The sooner he goes too far, the sooner the other noble houses will see him for the parasite he really is. They made it to the jump point without any more trouble. The Drifter's flame hung in space, ready to leap into the safety of hyperspace and carry them toward a future they couldn't predict. Reality twisted and warped around them. As the ship plunged into the tunnel between stars, a temporary sanctuary from the real world. Get some rest, Joran said, setting the autopilot with an expert flick of his wrist. We've got 18 hours to figure out our next move. Iria nodded but didn't leave, her eyes tracing the tired lines on his face. Joran, thank you. For the rescue, for all of this. Thank me when we actually win, he said, his dry sense of humor cutting through the exhaustion. Though I gotta admit, this is way better than hauling protein paste to mining colonies. He shrugged, a gesture that was equal parts defiant and determined. It's exciting, terrifying, exhausting, and probably a suicide mission. But if it saves people, it's a risk worth taking. She left him there, staring into the swirling colors of hyperspace, and went back to her cabin. The day had been an insane whirlwind of shocking discoveries and brutal violence, of plans made on the fly and tested by fire. But they had survived. They'd made contact with the Arendor Agrarian Pact, and they'd proven that Lord Varric's power wasn't absolute. It was a start. Taped to the mirror in her cabin was a new note. "You did good today. Sleep well. Tomorrow, we save the galaxy." No pressure. Iria actually smiled, despite the crushing weight of betrayal and the unknown future. Whatever secrets Joran was hiding, whatever was behind his impossible powers, he was turning out to be exactly the partner she needed. Not a master or a handler, but an ally. An ally in a crazy plan that just might work. Tomorrow, they would get Zinara's answer. Tomorrow, they would plan their next move against Varric. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. But tonight, in her tiny cabin on a beat-up old cargo ship, free from chains and auction blocks for the first time in forever, she would sleep. And that was more than she'd had in months. It was enough. The message from Ambassador Zinara came through just as they dropped out of hyperspace near a nebula that Vin had cheerfully labeled probably pirate-free. It was short and to the point. One convoy, 15 ships, loaded with hydroponic equipment and protein blocks. Destination? The Drace Fields. Departure in 48 hours. "That's faster than I expected," Joran said, fighting with a coffee machine that seemed to hold a personal grudge against him. He scanned the message on his datapad, taking a sip of the disgusting sludge it finally produced. "Zinara either really wants this to work, or she knows something we don't." Iria, who was an expert at reading between the lines of diplomatic messages, could feel the urgency. "Vin, what's the latest on the Drace Fields?" "It's getting bad, fast," the AI replied, her voice unusually serious. "There are food riots on 3 of the mining platforms. The colonial administrator declared martial law, which is a joke. He's got 12 security officers for 80,000 people. Oh, and a nasty strain of melon flu is ripping through the workers' housing. Without medical supplies, a lot of people are going to die." Joran finally got a decent cup of coffee out of the machine and winced at the taste. "We have to make sure that convoy gets to Drace. Varric is going to throw everything he has at it." "Not everything," Iria corrected, her mind already spinning with strategies. "He can't be seen openly attacking a humanitarian aid shipment. So he'll use proxies," Joran finished. "Pirates, rogue military units, unfortunate navigation errors." He pulled up a series of star charts on the galley's holodisplay. "The direct route is a death trap. Way too many places to set up an ambush. But the Void Shroud," he trailed off, highlighting a dangerous-looking path. "That's a dead zone," Iria said, her voice sharp. "No communications, navigation systems barely work. Ships go in there and they just disappear." "Ships that go in alone disappear," Joran countered, a reckless glint in his eye. "But 15 ships, all moving together, led by someone who knows the route? That's a different story." Iria looked at him, knowing there was more to his confidence than just talk. "You've been through the Void Shroud before." "Not because I wanted to," he said, his expression shutting down like a blast door. "The point is, Varric will never see it coming. You can't ambush something you can't track." "The Arendor pilots will never agree to it," she argued. "It's way too risky." "Then we make it less risky," Joran said, already manipulating the display, marking out what looked like safe passages. "We'll go on ahead, scout the route, clear out any surprises, and drop navigation beacons. By the time the convoy gets there, it'll be as safe as any other trade route." "You're talking about taking one little ship through the most dangerous patch of space in the galaxy to clear a path," Iria said, shaking her head in disbelief. "That's not brave, Joran. That's suicidal." It would be suicidal without you, he said, meeting her eyes with total confidence. Your tactical mind, my knowledge of the route, and Vin's number-crunching genius. We can pull this off. I'm touched by your faith in my processors, Vin cut in, her tone dripping with fake sentimentality. Although my warranty specifically says it's void in zones of dimensional instability. Your warranty expired 50 years ago, Joran shot back without missing a beat. A minor detail I choose to ignore, Vin replied. Iria considered their options, her mind a whirlwind of risk versus reward. The safe routes were a guaranteed failure. Varric's influence was just too great. But the Void Shroud, that was a force of nature, a place where skill mattered more than sheer power. What makes you so sure I won't lose my mind in there? She asked quietly. The curse. Joran leaned back, studying her. From what I've seen, your curse is tied to intent, to someone wanting to possess you. Every one of those buyers who went insane saw you as a thing, a tool or a weapon to be used. The Shroud doesn't want to own anything. It just is. It was a shaky theory, but it was something. Fine, she said. We scout the route. But first we send a message. One to Zinara, and one to Varric. Her smile was razor-sharp. He needs to know that I'm done hiding. 2 hours later, they had a secure connection to the Silith Dominion's public news network. Iria sat at the ship's communication console, wearing the only formal outfit she had. A deep purple tunic that made her lavender skin and silver glyphs seem to glow like constellations. You sure about this? Joran asked from behind the camera. Once you go public, there's no turning back. That's the whole point, she said, her posture straightening into the commanding presence that had once led entire fleets. Start recording. The small red light blinked on, and Iria Vion, the former warrior empress of the Silith Dominion, spoke to her people for the first time since her downfall. Citizens of the Dominion, she began, her voice ringing with an authority they hadn't heard in years. I am not speaking to you from a position of power, but from a place of purpose. For too long, you have been told that I am cursed, that I am dangerous, a relic of a violent past. There may be some truth to that, but you should ask yourselves, who benefits from my silence? She paused, letting the question hang in the air like a drawn sword. Imagine watching your kids get sick, while the medicine that could save them is sold off to the richest families in the capital. Imagine knowing there's more than enough food to feed everyone, but it's left to rot in storage because you live on the wrong side of the border. This is the injustice we're living under, and if you're as sick of it as I am, then listen up for the next 60 seconds. Lord Varric sold you a story about strength and order, but let me ask you, who is that security really for? It's not for the miners on Dre 7 who haven't seen a fresh food shipment in 6 months. It's not for the teachers on the Terran space station trying to explain lessons to children too hungry to even think straight. And it's definitely not for the war veterans on Thresh, left with nothing after giving everything for a government that forgot them. My name is Iria, and I am done being silent. I am done watching our people be treated like they don't matter. But change isn't going to come from a war. It's going to come from something the powerful are much more afraid of, the truth. In the coming days, you're going to hear a lot of lies about me. They'll call me a traitor, say I'm crazy, or that I'm a threat to our way of life. Don't believe them. Just look around and ask yourself, who's getting rich from the way things are now? And who's suffering? Ask why the trade routes that could bring us life-saving supplies are closed, while ships full of luxury goods arrive in the core worlds every single day. To every single one of you listening, I make you this promise. You are not forgotten. Your fight is my fight, and it is going to end. And to Lord Varric, I have this to say. That throne you're sitting on comes with responsibilities you have completely ignored. The people you rule are not just numbers on a spreadsheet. You have 48 hours to open the trade routes to the border colonies. That isn't a threat. It's a chance for you to prove you're something more than a greedy tyrant. And for everyone else, for those who believe we can be better, I just ask you to remember who we were always meant to be. Not conquerors, but builders. Not owners, but guardians. The choice is yours." The message cut out. Joran let out a long, slow whistle. "Well, that's definitely going to make Varric mad," he said. "Get it on every network you can," Iria ordered, standing up. "Military, civilian, even the entertainment channels. I want everyone to see it." "Way ahead of you," Vin's voice chirped from the console. "But Dominion security is going to track this signal back to us in just a few hours." "Good," Iria replied, a fire in her eyes. "Let them know exactly where to find us." Joran looked at her with a mix of awe and worry. "How long until we reach the Void Shroud's edge?" 12 hours if we push it," he answered, already moving to the pilot's seat. "Everyone strap in. This is where things get interesting." That trip gave Iria a rare moment alone to think, to face the truths she'd been pushing away for years. Sitting in her small cabin, she thought about her past. The curse, as everyone called it, the strange glyphs on her skin that she believed marked her for doom. But Joran's words had planted a seed of doubt. What if it wasn't a curse? What if it was something else? Something hidden in her family's DNA? She could almost hear her grandmother's voice, telling her stories of ancient protections coded right into their genes. But what were they supposed to be protecting her from? A soft chime at her door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in," she said. Joran walked in, carefully holding 2 hot mugs. "Figured you could use some tea. This stuff is actually drinkable, not like that sludge we call coffee." He smiled, a little tired, but warm, and handed her a cup. The spicy, sweet smell filled the small room, a tiny piece of comfort from a life spent hauling cargo between the stars. Iria took it with a grateful nod, breathing in the aroma. "You always manage to find the good stuff." "It's one of the few perks of the job," he said, sinking into the room's only other chair. "By the way, Vin says your broadcast just hit 12 million views. Dominion ships are trying to block it, but it's spreading too fast." "Good," Iria said softly. She looked at him over the top of her mug, feeling his unspoken question. "Can I ask you something personal?" Joran finally said. "Back when Varric took over, why didn't you fight him? You had people loyal to you, you had the resources. You could have stopped him." The question hit her right in the chest. "Because a fight would have started a civil war," she admitted, the words tasting like old regrets. "Thousands would have died. Our entire civilization would have been crippled, right when pirates have been testing our defenses. I thought stepping down was the only way to keep us safe." She shook her head. "I was so wrong. All it did was let the rot spread in secret." "You weren't wrong. You were just hopeful," Joran said gently. "You thought the other nobles would stop him from going too far. Instead, they helped him." "I see that now," Iria said, her gaze firm. "Sometimes the whole system is the problem." She looked around the beat-up cargo ship. "Look at us. A runaway Empress and a smuggler, trying to save the galaxy one shipment at a time. It's ridiculous." "Most of the best ideas start out sounding ridiculous," Joran replied with a small smile, like a person thinking they could fly, or a scientist saying tiny invisible things could make you sick. "Speaking of tiny and ridiculous," Vin's voice cut in, "I'm detecting some really weird stuff up ahead. Gravitational fields that shouldn't exist and radiation that suggests time is going haywire. We're getting close." They rushed to the bridge. The main screen showed a wall of pure blackness, not just the absence of stars, but a darkness that seemed to swallow light itself. "The Void Shroud," Joran said quietly. "My sensors are going crazy," Vin announced. "I've got 17 different gravity readings. My clock says next Tuesday already happened yesterday, and I'm picking up an energy signal that my database says is impossible." "Sounds about right," Joran muttered, carefully guiding the ship. "The secret to flying in here is to stop trusting your instruments." "The shroud plays tricks on your mind," he explained, switching to manual controls. "It shows you things you expect to see or things you're afraid of. You're going to hear voices, maybe people you know, calling for help. You might even hear your own thoughts talking back to you. No matter what happens, don't react. Just follow my lead. As they flew into the darkness, it felt like diving into a pool of ink. The ship groaned, protesting against the twisted laws of physics. "Hull integrity is dropping," Vin's voice sounded distorted. "And my clock now says we've been in here for 7 years. "Ignore it, Vin," Joran ordered, his hands tight on the controls. "Just keep us pointed straight based on where the stars were before we entered." "What stars?" Vin shrieked. "There's nothing out here." "Then make something up," Iria snapped, her old commander instincts kicking in. "Pretend it's a jamming field. Focus on what we know. Our speed, our direction, and our own sense of time." And then, the whispers started. At first, it was just static, but then they sharpened into voices from her past. Her mother, who had been gone for 20 years, was calling her name. Then, the view screen flickered to life, showing their own bridge, but twisted and wrong. The walls were covered in pulsating silver glyphs, just like the ones on her skin. A version of Joran turned to face her, but his eyes were empty and black. "You can't escape what you are," a chilling voice echoed all around them. "You were made to be a weapon, a curse, a breaker of worlds." "No," Iria whispered, but then her voice grew stronger, into a defiant shout. "No!" The glyphs on her own skin suddenly blazed with a brilliant, controlled light. "I was made for protection." The words felt ancient, pulled from a memory she didn't know she had. In that one moment, everything clicked. Her enhancements, the glyphs, the so-called curse. It wasn't a weapon at all. It was a shield, a safeguard designed to protect against ancient, hungry things that live in the dark spaces between worlds. Things exactly like the Void Shroud. "Joran!" she yelled. "This place isn't just a storm. It's alive and it's trying to feed on us." "I know," he grunted, wrestling with the controls. The ship bucked and twisted as he somehow dodged invisible currents. "How are you doing that?" she cried. "The same way you're keeping that thing out of our heads," he yelled back. "By being something it doesn't understand." And he was right. Her glyphs formed a protective barrier of light, pushing back against the shroud's mental assault, while Joran's instincts created a small bubble of stable reality around their ship. Together, they were doing the impossible. They flew for what felt like an eternity. Finally, they burst out of the darkness and back into a sky filled with beautiful, calming stars. They had made it. After they had dropped their trail of navigation beacons for the convoy to follow, Iria used their now secure channel to broadcast a new message, not to the people, but to the Dominion military. She didn't threaten them. Instead, she showed them the shroud, explaining that it was expanding and that her curse was the only key to understanding and fighting it. It was the ultimate surprise. Varric, in his greed, had exiled the one person who could save them all. Faced with a choice between a tyrant who starved them and a protector who could shield them from an existential threat, the military's loyalty shattered. Varric was arrested by his own guards, not with a bang, but with the quiet click of handcuffs. The convoy made it to the colonies, bringing food, medicine, and hope. Iria never took back the throne. She realized that true leadership wasn't about ruling. It was about serving. She, Joran, and the ever-sarcastic Vin became guardians of the Outer Rim, a symbol that even in the darkest of times, one small light, guided by courage, can show everyone the way home. The real lesson she learned was that you don't fight darkness with more darkness. You fight it by being the light. Model, how did you know? Joran's eyes locked onto hers, searching for an answer. "You tell me," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "It wasn't something I did on purpose. When that thing tried to get inside my head, something just woke up. Something ancient and deep. Our bloodline wasn't meant to be a weapon. he said, his voice barely a whisper, a shadow falling across his features. We were created to be guardians against creatures like the one we just fought. Things that exist in the cracks of reality. Things that are always hungry. He paused. I've run into them before, a long time ago. It's how I can do what I do. This null field. It's not natural. It's a wound, a place where reality was shattered so completely that it refuses to ever break again. She desperately wanted to ask more, to understand the story behind his pain, but the look on his face stopped her. Whatever had given him this power was not a memory he shared easily. We need to let Zenara know the routes have been marked, she said, changing the subject and turning toward the comms panel. Message is already being drafted, Vin chimed in, the AI's synthetic voice dripping with its trademark sarcasm. I'm leaving out the parts about cosmic horrors that eat reality and my own resulting existential crisis. Probably best not to scare the Arendor. A frantic energy filled the drifter's flame for the next several hours. Iria Vion and Joran Vault huddled over schematics, analyzing the pathetic defenses of the Drace fields. All they had were a few outdated turrets and a handful of overworked security drones. They managed to identify a small, scattered network of allies, loyalists still clinging to a sliver of hope in the darkness, all bracing for the inevitable moment when Lord Varric's forces would discover their plan. He'll dispatch the Third Fleet, Iria predicted, her voice calm and filled with tactical confidence. Admiral Kane is completely in his pocket. She'll execute any order without a second thought. Joran shook his head, his eyes glued to the star charts. The Third Fleet is 4 days out from Drace Fields, even at full burn. By that time, our convoy will have already dropped off its cargo and finalized the trade agreements. An attack after the fact would be pretty hard to justify. You're assuming Varric gives a damn about justification, Iria shot back, her eyes narrowing. I'm assuming the noble houses give a damn about their profits, Joran retorted, his tone sharp and practical. Every destroyed ship is lost income. Every dead trader is a closed market. Varric can't afford to be that obvious. Vin's voice suddenly cut through their tactical debate. Incoming transmission, priority 1. Military grade, using old Imperial command codes. A frown creased Iria's forehead as her instinct screamed. Put it on screen! The monitor flickered to life, revealing a face Iria never thought she'd see again. It was Commander Lura Cade, her former second-in-command. She was older, dressed in civilian clothes, but the disciplined posture of a soldier was still there, unbreakable. Empress, Lura began, then caught herself with a wry smile. Iria, I saw your broadcast. Elra, Iria whispered, a tidal wave of emotions, relief, guilt, hope crashing over her. I thought you were dead. The official report said. The report said what Varric wanted it to say, Lura cut in, her expression turning to stone. 11 of us made it through his purge. We've been in hiding ever since, waiting, looking for a chance to bring back legitimate rule. Your broadcast, it gave us that hope. I'm not trying to restore anything, Lara, Iria said, choosing her words with care, her voice steady despite the hurricane in her chest. The old system is part of the problem. Then build a better one, Laura insisted, leaning closer, her eyes blazing with intensity. You've got more supporters than you realize. Officers who still remember what honor means. Administrators who actually care about their colonies. Even some nobles are starting to see the ruin Varric is causing. We are with you. What are you proposing? Iria asked. A face-to-face meeting. Neutral territory, Lura said. Taran Station, in the Terran system. It's run by the Stellar Commerce League. Their only loyalty is to the bottom line, which, strangely enough, makes them reliable, she added with a grim smile. 2 days from now, can you get there? Iria shot a look at Joran, who gave her a slight, almost imperceptible nod. We'll be there. Good, Lura said. And Iria, it's damn good to see you free. We should have done more when the coup happened. We won't let you down again." The transmission ended, plunging the bridge into a thick silence. "It might be a trap," Joran finally said, his voice low. "It might be," Iria conceded, shaking her head. "But I served with Laura for 15 years. If she's turned—" She trailed off, unable to even say the words. "I have to trust that some loyalties are stronger than fear." "Then we go. But we go in smart," Joran said, already pulling up the star charts for the Terran system. "First things first, let's make sure that convoy makes it to Drace Fields in one piece." "Agreed," Iria said, her resolve hardening like steel. 12 hours later, the Drace Fields came into view on their main screen. It was a sad cluster of 5 mining stations orbiting a massive gas giant, all connected by flimsy-looking transport tubes. The decay was obvious. Hull patches were long overdue, navigation beacons blinked weakly on emergency power, and the defense platforms were little more than rusted suggestions of security. "Mining Station Alpha is hailing us," Vin announced. "They sound, thrilled." The comms channel crackled open, revealing a worn-out woman in a tattered administrator's uniform. "Unidentified vessel, state your name and purpose," she said, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "If you're here to give us another quota, you can save your breath. We have nothing left to give." "Administrator, this is the Drifter's Flame," Joran responded. "We're the advanced scouts for a humanitarian aid convoy. 15 ships loaded with food and medical supplies are set to arrive in 40 hours. The administrator's expression shifted from distrust to a flicker of hope, then back to weary skepticism. "Nobody sends aid to the Drace Fields. What's the scam?" Iria switched on her own video feed, her commanding presence cutting through even the grainy transmission. "The scam is that you'll need to sign new trade pacts with the Arendor Agrarian Collective. Fair deals, for mutual benefit. In exchange, the supply convoys will keep coming." The administrator's eyes went wide as recognition finally dawned. But the report said you were dead. Or cursed." "I'm just trying to keep your people from starving to death," Iria interrupted, her tone sharp, but with an undercurrent of compassion. "Will you receive the convoy?" "Yes," the administrator choked out, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, of course, but that gives Varric 40 hours to try and stop you." "Then use that time to get your distribution centers and medical bays ready," Iria commanded, her voice both gentle and firm. "Your people have suffered long enough. Help is on its way." The woman nodded, tears shining in her eyes. "I'll get the word out to the other stations. We'll be ready." As the channel went dead, Joran turned to Iria. "Varric isn't going to wait 40 hours. He's already got spies in this system." "I'm counting on it," Iria replied with a sharp smile, the kind that used to make enemy admirals nervous. "Sometimes the only way to draw out a poison is to give it something to react to. Vin, start scanning for any ships that have arrived in the last week. Look for military transponders, falsified manifests, anything out of the ordinary." "Way ahead of you," Vin replied. "And what do you know? 3 ships match that description. One is pretending to be a freighter, but is putting out energy signatures consistent with hidden weapon systems. The other 2 are supposedly independent traders who've been asking a whole lot of questions about station defenses." "Perfect," Iria said, striding over to the tactical console. "Let's give them something juicy to report." What followed was a masterclass in deception. They made a show of visiting each mining station, openly discussing convoy distribution points and defensive weaknesses, all while Vin silently tracked the spy ships, logging their positions and assessing their capabilities. "They're on the move," Vin reported, "converging on a point to intercept the convoy as soon as it drops out of the void shroud." "So predictable," Joran grumbled. "They'll attack and then claim the convoy was lost in some tragic navigational accident." "How terribly tragic," Iria said, her voice laced with sarcasm. "Except it's not going to happen." Her fingers danced across the tactical display, plotting their countermove. "Vin, can you fake our ship's destruction?" "Oh, I like that." "How delightfully devious," the AI said with genuine pleasure. Absolutely. Debris field, a looping distress call, the whole 9 yards. But we'll need to blow something up for real to make it look convincing. That old cargo pod we've been meaning to get rid of, Joran suggested. We can pack it with scrap metal and rig a fuel cell to overload. The explosion should be spectacular. 6 hours later, they put their plan into action. The Drifter's Flame began broadcasting panicked distress calls, with Vin giving an award-worthy performance as a terrified AI. As the spy ships moved in to see what was happening, they ejected the rigged cargo pod and blew it to pieces. On any scanner, it looked like the Drifter's Flame had suffered a catastrophic failure. But in reality, they had gone completely dark, drifting silently on minimal power in the shadow of a large asteroid. And now we wait, Joran said quietly, his eyes fixed on the sensor readings. The enemy vessels picked through the fake wreckage, confirmed that the Drifter's Flame was destroyed, and then moved back to their ambush positions, completely unaware that their target was very much intact and watching their every move. 34 hours later, the convoy dropped out of the void shroud, and the trap was sprung. Not Varric's trap, but theirs. Convoy vessels, this is Commander Luracade aboard the Stalwart Ember. A familiar voice boomed across all open channels. You are now under the protection of the Free Fleet. Any ship that interferes with this humanitarian mission will be classified as a hostile target. On cue, 3 heavy cruisers materialized from hyperspace, their weapon ports glowing, their targeting systems already locked. The massive warships hung in space like angels of vengeance. The 3 spy ships, suddenly and hopelessly outgunned, decided they had urgent business elsewhere and scattered like rats into the deep black. Lara, you magnificent bastard, Iria Vion whispered, a powerful wave of relief and awe washing over her. Where in the hell did you get 3 heavy cruisers? As if she had heard the question, Lura's voice crackled over their private comms. Empress, if you're listening, and I know you are, the meeting at Terran Station is a go. We have a lot to talk about. The convoy proceeded to the Drace fields without any more trouble. From their hiding spot behind the asteroid, Iria and Joran Volt watched as crates of food and medical supplies were unloaded into the hands of people who had lost all hope. They saw children take their first real bites of food in months, their thin, pale faces slowly lighting up with a joy that had been extinguished for far too long. It was a sight that hit Iria right in the heart, reigniting a sense of purpose she feared she had lost forever. We did it, Joran said softly, his voice filled with a quiet, powerful pride. Iria turned to him, her smile gentle but fierce. No, she corrected. We started it. Well, it's a start, he quipped, his dry humor coaxing a laugh out of her, a sound so light and carefree she hadn't heard it from herself in ages. Not bad for a cargo pilot with a bounty on his head and a supposedly cursed Empress. No, she agreed, a genuine smile touching her lips. Not bad at all. As the Drifter's Flame ignited and pulled away from Drace Fields, Iria's gaze fixed on the path stretching out before them. The upcoming meeting with the LRA and the Free Fleet, the unavoidable showdown with Lord Varric, and the slow, dangerous work of transforming the crumbling Salith Dominion into something better. The risks were enormous, likely fatal. But for the first time since her exile, hope was a fire burning brighter than her fear, not just for herself, but for all the colonies, for a future where power was used to protect, not to destroy. The star lanes blurred as they jumped towards the Terran system, hurtling toward the unknown. Back in her cabin, Joran's note was still taped to the mirror. Tomorrow we save the galaxy. No pressure. A small, defiant smile played on her lips. No pressure at all. Terran Station emerged from the blackness like a giant steel lotus, its docking arms extending to welcome ships from a dozen different species. The Stellar Commerce League had stayed neutral for 3 centuries by following one simple rule: Profit always came before politics. It was the perfect backdrop for a meeting that could decide the fate of the Dominion. "Getting nervous?" Joran asked as they coasted in, his hands guiding the drifter's flame with expert precision between two massive freighters. Iria thought about it for a moment, her bioglyphs glowing softly. "No. Anxious, maybe. It's been years since I had to build alliances instead of just giving commands. This is a whole different kind of war." "Trading words for weapons and promises for plasma fire," Joran remarked, adjusting their approach vector with practiced ease. "But words can be their own kind of weapon. My grandmother always said the right phrase at the right time could bring down an empire. She taught me that long before she taught me how to fight," Iria said, her eyes fixed on the growing station in the viewport. "I wonder what she'd make of all this. Her granddaughter, the fallen Empress, trying to save her people with grain shipments and trade agreements. She'd probably say, 'An empire that eats is an empire that lasts,'" Vin's voice chimed in, surprisingly gentle. "The historical archives show your grandmother always prioritized infrastructure over invasion, just like you're doing." The docking was flawless, and they soon found themselves stepping into Terran Station's central market. It was an overwhelming explosion of senses, the scent of spices from faraway colonies, the smell of mechanist oil, and the electric tang of Etherin technology. Merchants shouted out their deals in a dozen languages, their universal translators buzzing to keep up. Joran moved through the chaos like he was born in it, but Iria noticed his hand never drifted too far from the weapon hidden under his jacket, his personal null field humming, ready to activate in an instant. "Expecting trouble?" she murmured. "Always," he answered, his tone casual but his eyes scanning every shadow. "It's the best way to avoid being disappointed." He stopped at a crossway, glancing at his datapad. "The meeting's in the guild tower. It's neutral ground, protected by automated defenses. The hard part is just getting there." Iria nodded, her strategic mind already calculating the threats. There were too many alleys perfect for an ambush, too many crowds for an assassin to hide in. "We should have brought more people." "We did," Joran said with a subtle nod toward a nearby food stall, where a familiar Corbin was arguing loudly over the price of dried fruit. "Myra called in a few favors. We have professional eyes watching our backs, making sure we get to that meeting in one piece." Iria felt a wave of gratitude for Myra Solon. Favors were a currency more valuable than credits, and Myra was spending them generously. They made it to the guild tower without any trouble, though Iria counted at least 3 moments where she sensed a potential threat that just seemed to melt away. The tower was a masterpiece of paranoia, layered with energy shields, weapon dampeners, and a security system so advanced that even her military-trained mind was impressed. Commander Laccade was waiting for them in a conference room designed for signing peace treaties. Her face was lined with the exhaustion of someone who'd been fighting a secret war for years, but her eyes held the same fierce loyalty Iria remembered. "Empress," Lyra said, then corrected herself with a wry smile. "Old habits." "Those habits are why you're here," Iria replied, pulling her former second-in-command into a warm embrace. "It's so good to see you, Lyra." "You too, though I wish it were under better circumstances," Lyra said, gesturing to the others in the room. "Allow me to introduce our little conspiracy of hope." The group was smaller than Iria had anticipated, but incredibly diverse. There was Admiral Valthor, whose fleet had a convenient habit of losing navigation whenever Varric ordered them to enforce his blockades. Director Saurin, whose brilliant and creative accounting had kept the colonies running despite massive budget cuts. And Lord Gavin, one of the few nobles who had openly opposed her removal from power. "An interesting crew," Joran murmured. "Desperate times," Gavin shot back, having overheard him. "I spent 30 years building my house's fortune on interstellar trade. Varric's policies destroyed half of it in 18 months. Ideology is a luxury I simply can't afford." "Honest greed," Joran said with that dry wit of his. "I can work with that." His comment earned him a few sharp glares, but also a few hidden smiles. Shall we get started? Laura activated a privacy field, and the room fell into a secure, soundproof silence. We've all risked a great deal to be in this room. Let's make it worthwhile. The hours that followed were a careful ballet of strategy and bargaining. Each person brought a vital piece of the puzzle: fleet positions, economic projections, intelligence on Varric's key supporters. A clear picture began to form. The Slith Dominion was on the brink of total collapse. Varric is bleeding the colonies dry to keep the core worlds happy, Sauron explained, his grim financial models projected in the air. It's completely unsustainable. In 6 months, we're going to see system-wide failures, infrastructure breakdowns, massive refugee crises, a complete collapse of galactic government. Unless we give them another option, Admiral Valor added, changing the display to show his fleet deployments. Varric's power comes from fear and bribes. If we take away either one, his support will evaporate. The Drace convoy proved you can provide for the people when he can't. A few more wins like that, and the other noble houses will start to reconsider where their loyalties lie, Gavin said. Then we need to speed up the timeline, Iria declared, her mind racing as she connected the dots in the data. The Harvest Festival is in 2 weeks. Every major house will send representatives to Sylith Core. You're suggesting we go back to the capital? Laura interrupted, her voice sharp with alarm. That's a suicide mission. Every guard, every security camera, every single drone is programmed to eliminate you on sight. Not if I'm there legally, Iria said, letting a sharp smile play on her lips as she watched their confusion. The Harvest Festival includes the Petition of Grievances. It's an ancient rite that allows any citizen to bring their case before the Assembly. Varric can't get rid of it without destroying his own legitimacy. But you're not a citizen anymore, Sauron pointed out gently. They stripped you of your titles. But I am, Joran said, speaking up for the first time in an hour. I have Terran citizenship, which is recognized by treaty. I can present the petition as Iria's official advocate. A heavy silence fell over the room as the sheer audacity of the plan sank in. A human, speaking for the deposed Empress in the very heart of the Slith government. The symbolism alone will force their hand, Gavin said slowly. The media will go into a frenzy, Valor added. Every single citizen will be watching. And Varric will be forced to respond in public, Laura finished, her eyes wide with understanding. No back-alley tactics, no unfortunate accidents, Iria Vaughn said, her voice filled with newfound resolve as the plan locked into place. We're going to drag Varric out into the light and make him justify his actions to the very people he claims to be protecting. It's incredibly risky, Director Sauron warned, his tone grave. Even with legal standing, there are 1,000 ways they can kill you on Sylith Core. Everything we're doing is risky, Iria countered, her gaze meeting each of theirs with unwavering certainty. But this could actually work. They spent another 3 hours hashing out the details, a meticulous process of refining their strategy and pooling their resources. By the time they finished, Iria felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in months. Real, genuine optimism. A fragile but fierce hope for a better future. As the others began to leave through separate, secure exits, Lakad stayed behind, her expression serious. There's one more thing, she said in a low voice. Something I didn't want to bring up in front of the others. Iria simply nodded, signaling for her to go on. Laura pulled out a secure datapad. I've been looking into this curse of yours, or at least what Varric calls a curse. These are the medical files for everyone who supposedly went insane after they betrayed you. See a pattern? Iria's augmented mind processed the data instantly, the patterns jumping out at her. They all had neural implants, high-end models, used for controlling AI systems or bypassing security. Lara's face was grim. Exactly. The kind of tech someone would use to try and control a person like a puppet. But the madness. It was their own implants overloading. Your body's defensive systems detected the hack and fought back with a devastating counterattack. It isn't a curse, Iria. It's an immune response. The truth hit Iria with the force of a physical blow. Fragments of her past suddenly snapped into place. Her grandmother's vague warnings about protections. The Vaughn bloodline's biological modifications designed for defense, not attack. Even her strange encounter with the Void Shroud suddenly made a terrifying kind of sense. "Who else knows?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Just me," Lyra replied, glancing toward Joran, who was standing guard by the door. "And now you, and your pilot. He's quite an interesting ally." "He's more than an ally," Iria admitted, the words surprising her as they came out. I don't know what he is exactly, but I trust him." "Good," Lyra said, squeezing her shoulder. "Because you're going to need someone you can trust completely for what comes next. Be careful, Iria. Varric is more desperate than he lets on. And desperate men are capable of monstrous things." After Lyra was gone, Iria and Joran walked through the quieter sections of Terran Station as the day cycle began to wind down. Her mind was a whirlwind of new information. The curse was a defense, Joran's mysterious null field. "You're thinking too loud," Joran said, his voice light, but his perception sharp as ever. "I can practically hear the gears turning in your head, model." "Laura's files back up your theory," Iria said, glancing over at him. "The curse is some kind of defense system, which just makes you even more of a puzzle. You don't have any implants, but you still don't set it off." "Maybe it's because I'm not trying to control anything," Joran suggested, steering them past a maintenance crew. "Or maybe," she said, stopping so he had to turn and face her, "whatever's broken inside me is even worse than what's broken in you." "There's nothing broken about you," he said, his hand gently brushing her arm, a soft anchor in the bustling corridor. "You're not an impossibility, Iria." "Oh, but I am," he replied, his voice quiet but certain. "I shut down half a docking bay with a single thought. I can generate fields that just ignore physics. I'm a walking paradox, Iria." "So am I," she shot back, her glyphs giving off a faint pulse of light. "Maybe that's why we actually work. Two impossibilities, somehow making something possible." He met her gaze, and for a second, she saw a flicker of raw vulnerability under his usual dry humor and unshakable competence, scars that ran much deeper than anything on his skin. "We should head back to the ship," he said, deflecting and putting his walls back up. "Start planning our move on Silith Core." She let him have his retreat, recognizing that fragile trust was a boundary you don't push. They walked the rest of the way in a comfortable silence toward the docking ring where the drifter's flame was waiting. But something was wrong. A small, plain brown package was sitting right on the ramp. "Stay back," Joran ordered, pulling out a handheld scanner. "No explosives, no toxins, no energy signatures. Wait, is that chocolate?" They carried it inside, still wary. Tucked inside was a box of exquisite Terran chocolates and a handwritten note. It read, "For the journey ahead. The universe is a little sweeter when you share it. From a friend who believes in tomorrow." There was no signature. "Doesn't need one," Iria said, a small smile playing on her lips. Joran's grin was subtle, but genuinely warm. Myra always did have a flair for the dramatic and a love for good chocolate. Later in the galley, they shared the treats, the rich flavor melting away some of the day's tension. Vin chimed in over the comms with an unsolicited lecture on the optimal temperature for cocoa, which was so absurd it was actually comforting. 2 weeks until we face the most hostile audience in the galaxy, Joran mused between bites. Ought to be fun. We really need to work on your definition of fun, Iria teased, but her smile didn't fade. We'll have to be prepared, she continued, Every single word, every gesture, they're going to pick it all apart. Good thing we have a master strategist on our side, he said, nodding toward her. And a pilot who's famous for pulling off impossible stunts, she returned. She met his eyes, a warmth spreading through her chest. About what you said earlier, about being wrong. Just let it go, Jor. We both have enough baggage without adding things that aren't there. His voice was firm, but gentle. Drop it, Iria. We have a galaxy to save. We can deal with our personal demons later. I don't, she corrected softly. He nodded, respecting the boundary she'd drawn. It felt like another thread of trust woven between them. They had 2 weeks to get ready for the performance of a lifetime, a petition designed to shake an entire empire. The days quickly fell into a steady rhythm of intense preparation. Iria wrote and rewrote their petition, carefully crafting arguments that would connect with beings from every species and social class. Joran coordinated with their growing web of allies, making sure they had safe passage and media attention. Meanwhile, Vin analyzed Varric's most likely reactions with cold, hard precision. He'll try to paint you as a warmonger, Vin predicted during one session. He'll play up your military history while burying your diplomatic achievements. So we'll counter with the trade agreements, Iria shot back. We'll show them that strength and negotiation aren't mutually exclusive. He'll also question Joran's right to speak for you, Vin added. A human speaking for Dominion nobility? It shatters every tradition they have. That's exactly why it's going to work, Joran cut in. Every species watching will see a little of themselves in an outsider who's demanding to have a voice. They practiced in the cargo bay, with Vin projecting holographic crowds that booed and cheered in response to their words. Iria learned how to soften her powerful presence, to inspire people instead of intimidating them. Joran perfected his delivery, finding the perfect balance between respectful tradition and defiant courage that would command the room's attention. In between their grueling sessions, they found little pockets of normalcy. They shared meals where the mission wasn't even mentioned. They played three-dimensional chess. Joran always lost, but played with a stubborn cheerfulness. They spent quiet hours together, their shared purpose weaving a silent bond between them. One evening, as the streaks of hyperspace flashed by the viewport like ribbons of light, Joran finally spoke up. I've been thinking about what happens after all this, assuming there is an after. Optimism, remember? Iria teased, turning to face him. What do you want, Iria? He asked, his voice unexpectedly soft. Not for the Dominion, not for the colonies. For you. The question took her completely by surprise. It was like he'd opened a door to a part of herself she'd buried under years of duty. I don't know, she admitted. What I wanted was always second place to my obligations. She paused, searching for an honest answer. I want to build something that lasts. Not an empire or a dynasty, but a system where a kid on some forgotten border colony has the same shot at life as one born in the core worlds. A place where trade is free and fair, where power is used to serve, not to consume. That's still about other people, Joran pointed out gently. Maybe, she said, meeting his gaze. That's what I want for myself. To matter in a way that actually helps. She studied him for a moment. What about you? What does Joran Valta want? To stop running, he said, the words surprising even himself as they came out. I've just been moving for so long, dodging questions I didn't want to answer. Maybe it's finally time to find a reason to stand still. In a ship that's held together by hope and spot welds? She asked, a smile tugging at her lips. The location isn't the point, he said, his eyes holding hers. It's about who you're standing still with. The moment stretched between them, thick with unspoken feelings, until Vin's voice crackled over the comm with a navigation update, breaking the spell and pulling them back to safer topics. 3 days before the Harvest Festival, an encrypted message from Director Saurin lit up their console. Lord Varric was beefing up security on Sylith Core. He was trying to disguise it as festival preparations, but the focus of his efforts was obvious: the government quarter, the exact place where they were scheduled to present their petition. "He knows," Iria said, her voice calm but threaded with steel. "Of course he knows," Joran replied, already pulling up the latest intel on his datapad. "The real question is, what's he planning to do about it?" "He can't just openly refuse the petition," Iria reasoned. "That would shatter centuries of tradition, but he'll definitely try to contain the fallout." "Then we'll just have to make sure the fallout is too big to be contained," she said, flicking on the communication console with a decisive snap. "It's time to call in every single favor we're owed." The next 72 hours were a whirlwind of frantic coordination. Lord Gavern leaked carefully selected details to media outlets that were hungry for a scandal, planting whispers of a coming change. Admiral Valthor moved her fleet to a position near Sylith Core, officially for routine maintenance, but their looming presence was a silent promise of protection. Lacricade's underground network spread the word through hidden channels, guaranteeing that massive crowds would gather to watch the historic event. Even Ambassador Zenara threw in her support, publicly declaring that the Arendor Agrarian Pact would be observing the proceedings with great interest, a diplomatic power play that made it clear future trade deals depended on the outcome. On the morning they were set to leave for Sylith Core, Iria stood in her cabin, looking at her reflection. The formal robes Lyra had found for her fit perfectly, a deep purple with silver trim that honored her Vian heritage without the weight of her lost crown. Her glyphs pulsed with a steady, quiet rhythm, a sign of her complete control. A knock at the door broke her concentration. "Come in," she called. Joran walked in, and she had to suppress a smile. Someone, almost certainly Myra Solon, had managed to get him into formal Terran diplomatic attire. The dark suit fit his lean frame perfectly, and a small pin on his lapel marked him as a legally recognized advocate under interstellar law. "You clean up nice," she said, a teasing note in her voice. "I feel like I'm trying to use a weapon I don't understand," Joran grumbled, tugging at his stiff collar. "Give me my cargo coveralls any day." "You look distinguished. Respectable. Maybe even a little trustworthy," she said, her smile getting wider. "Okay, now you're just being cruel," he shot back, but his own grin gave him away. "Ready for this?" he asked. "No," she admitted, taking a deep breath to center herself. "But that's never stopped me before." She met his eyes. "Jor, whatever happens today, thank you. For everything." "Save the thanks until after we see if this actually works," he said, offering her his arm with a formal gesture that somehow felt completely natural between them. "Shall we go shake the foundations of an empire?" "Let's," she replied, her resolve flaring up as brightly as her glyphs. They made their way to the bridge, where Vin was waiting with the final coordinates and what she insisted was an inspirational speech, though it sounded a lot more like a stand-up comedy routine about bureaucratic incompetence. As the Drifter's flame dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Silas system, Iria saw Admiral Valthor's fleet, a silent, non-threatening formation that carried more weight than any words could. "Sylith Control, this is the Drifter's flame," Joran transmitted, his voice calm and professional. "Carrying authorized advocate Joran Valta and party, requesting approach vector for the Harvest Festival petition." The silence that followed stretched on just long enough to make Iria's stomach clench. Then, a crisp voice came back. "Drifter's flame, you are cleared for approach. Vector transmitted. Be advised, any deviation will trigger an immediate defensive response." "Understood. Drifter's flame out," Joran said, his hands moving surely over the controls. "Friendly bunch." "They're scared," Iria realized, her voice barely a whisper. "Not of us. They're scared of what we represent." Sylith Core filled the main viewport, a shining jewel of civilization wrapped in layers of orbital defenses and centuries of tradition. The government quarter gleamed below, its crystal towers reaching for the stars like greedy fingers. As they descended through the atmosphere, Iria could see the crowds. Thousands upon thousands of people were lining the processional route, held back by security barriers, but their presence was a powerful, unyielding force. They had come to witness history, one way or another. "Would you look at that?" Joran murmured. "They're broadcasting our descent live on every single channel." Vin immediately pulled up a dozen different feeds showing their ship. Commentators were buzzing with wild speculation. "No turning back now," Iria said, her heart beating a steady, resolute rhythm. "Was there ever?" Jor replied, expertly guiding their ship toward the designated landing pad, where an honor guard stood waiting for them. "Just remember the plan," he said quietly. "I'm the opening act. You're the evidence they can't ignore. Stay silent until they get sloppy and address you, which they will." She caught his grim smile. "Oh, I'm counting on it. That's when the real show begins." The landing was perfect, probably more Vin's skill than Jor's. As the ramp hissed down, Iria froze, hit by the crushing irony. The last time she set foot on Sealith Core, she was in chains, a condemned traitor. Now she was back, her only weapons a plan and the will to see it through. The honor guard snapped into formation, their professionalism a stark contrast to the fleet of warships hanging in the sky above. The walk to the assembly hall felt like a lifetime, yet it was over in a flash. Crowds shoved against the barriers. Some screamed her name in support, others spat curses, but most just watched, silent, waiting to see which way history would turn. The hall hadn't changed a bit. It was still a cavern of architecture designed to make you feel small, with its towering ceilings and tiered seating that placed the powerful high above the desperate. But Iria saw it differently now. It wasn't a place of intimidation. It was a stage, and she had learned how to command a stage a long, long time ago. Lord Varric sat in the speaker's chair, her chair. He was drowning in robes that could have financed an entire colony, looking softer and more insulated than she remembered. His expression cycled through shock, then fury, then cold calculation, before finally landing on a mask of smug amusement. The petition of grievances recognizes Joran Vault, citizen of Terrara, as advocate, a ceremonial voice announced. Joran stepped into the light, and Iria's chest swelled with pride. He looked like he belonged there. There wasn't a hint of fear on his face as he took in the grand theater. "Honored assembly," he started, his voice ringing out clear and strong. "I don't stand here today as a conqueror or a beggar. I'm here as a witness. I have seen the far reaches of the Dominion, where children are starving while food rots in the silos of the core worlds. I have seen loyal citizens left to die by the very government they served, an empire eating its own people to feed the greed of a handful of men." A wave of murmurs swept through the assembly. This wasn't how petitions were supposed to sound. "But I have also seen hope," Joran went on, his voice unshakable. "I've seen new trade deals that could end the shortages. I've seen officers who still believe in their oaths. I've seen citizens who are ready to build something better, not tear it all down." He let the silence hang in the air. "I speak for someone who is offering a way forward. Not a revolution, but an evolution. Not destruction, but a new beginning. Iria Vaughn is ready to serve, not as your Empress, but as the architect of a better future." "The criminal Vaughn forfeited all her rights!" Varric roared, smashing protocol to pieces, his voice thick with venom. "She is a curse, a danger to us all, unfit to even be here." "And yet, I am here." Iria stepped forward, her voice cutting through his rage like a laser. The glyphs on her skin flared to life, not with wild chaos, but with brilliant, controlled precision. "I am here, cousin, and I'm not the weapon you tried to make, or the monster from your bedtime stories. I am myself, and I have a question for this assembly. How many more of your citizens have to starve before you finally admit that your way has failed?" The chamber exploded into chaos. Some nobles screamed for her arrest, while others shouted that she had a right to be heard, their voices clashing in a deafening roar. Lord Varric's face was a mask of pure fury. But Iria wasn't finished. She held up a hand, and an astonishing silence fell over the room. It wasn't born of fear, but of the sheer power of her presence, her glowing glyphs a symbol of her unbreakable will. "I stand here today with no titles and no rank, but I am not alone," she proclaimed, gesturing toward the galleries packed with ordinary citizens, their faces a mixture of desperation and newfound hope. "I stand with every family that has to choose between buying food or medicine. I stand with every soldier ordered to guard empty warehouses. I stand with every merchant who just wants to make an honest living in a system designed to reward corruption." "Such pretty words," Varric sneered, his voice dripping with poison. "But words can't fill empty stomachs or protect our borders." "No," Joran said, stepping forward with a data tablet. "But these can." He linked the tablet to the hall's giant displays. "Trade agreements with the core worlds, supply contracts with the Terran medical consortiums, defense pacts with the Stellar Commerce League, all signed and waiting for a Dominion government brave enough to accept them." The screens lit up, one after another, with irrefutable proof. Data from the successful Dracefield's convoy, messages from eager new trade partners, economic models showing a future of prosperity built on cooperation, not conquest. "These are lies, manipulated data," Varric shouted, but the conviction in his voice was gone. "Then prove it," Iria challenged, her smile as sharp as a blade. "Open a single trade route. Let just one convoy through without interference. Show the colonies what happens when you lead with hope instead of fear. Or refuse, and prove what everyone here already suspects." Her glyphs pulsed, growing brighter. "That you care more about your control than your citizens. That the suffering in the Dominion isn't an accident, it's your policy. That you aren't a leader, you're a parasite." Varric shot to his feet, his hand instinctively going to the Dominion rod. "You dare!" "I dare because someone has to," Iria replied, her voice unwavering as her glyphs blazed. "Go on, cousin. Use the rod. Show everyone how you answer words with violence. Show them all who the real danger is." The moment stretched, thick with tension. The entire assembly held its breath. In the galleries, citizens held up their devices, recording every second in a quiet act of rebellion. Joran stepped between them, his voice calm but filled with an authority that needed no amplification. "Enough. This is bigger than some family drama or old grudges. This is about our future. Lord Varric, you have a choice. You can either embrace this change, or you can wait for it to run you over. The colonies are on the brink of collapse. Trade routes are failing. The empire you say you're protecting is crumbling around you. So what is it going to be?" For a heartbeat, Varric was frozen, his eyes darting around as he weighed his options. The crowds watching. The live feeds broadcasting across the sector. Admiral Valhor's fleet hanging in orbit. All his power was balanced on a knife's edge. Then, with a savage snarl, he raised the Dominion rod. But he didn't aim it at Iria or Joran. He fired it straight up, shattering the ancient crystal dome of the ceiling. Debris and glass rained down as screams erupted. Nobles and aides scrambled for cover in the sudden chaos. Security forces surged forward. In the middle of the mayhem, Varric's voice boomed, amplified by the rod's power. "This assembly is dissolved. I am declaring martial law. All dissidents will be arrested on sight." It was the worst possible move, and it was exactly what they had been waiting for. As guards swarmed them, a shimmering field expanded from Joran. It wasn't the devastating pulse he'd used before, but a precise, controlled sphere that rendered weapons and restraints useless without harming anyone. The guards stared in disbelief at the dead pieces of metal in their hands as their armor systems failed and their comms went silent. "Time to go," Joran said, his calm a steady anchor in the storm. They moved through the pandemonium with deadly grace, Iria's old training and Joran's impossible power clearing a path to the exit. Behind them, Varric's frantic cries for order were being ignored by more and more of his own men. Outside, the crowd had transformed into a churning sea of people. They weren't violent, but they were defiant, openly rejecting the declaration of martial law and demanding answers. The security forces looked lost, unsure whether to fire on citizens whose only crime was watching the truth unfold. "Over here!" Licati's voice crackled from a communicator Iria hadn't even known she was carrying. "Extraction is 3 blocks north." They sprinted through streets Iria had once commanded, past monuments to victories that now felt completely hollow. The Drifter's flame was waiting for them in the commercial district, having moved during the commotion. "Well, that went well," Vin remarked with heavy sarcasm as they scrambled up the ramp. "If by well, you mean we just triggered the total collapse of the government and kicked off a civil war." "Sometimes things have to fall apart before you can rebuild them," Iria said, buckling herself in as Joran slammed the button for an emergency launch. They shot into the sky just as security forces began to regroup below. But up in orbit, Valor's fleet shifted formation. Not an act of aggression, but a clear signal that firing on the Drifter's flame would have consequences. As they broke through the atmosphere, Iria could see small fires burning in the government district. They weren't riots of destruction. They were bonfires of defiance. Citizens were rejecting Varric's decree, demanding the assembly be restored, and calling for new leadership. "It started," she whispered, the weight of it all settling in her heart. "No," Joran corrected, reaching over and taking her hand, his touch a steadying force. "It's finishing. What starts now is whatever we build next." She squeezed his hand back, drawing strength from him. Below them, Silith Core was a world in turmoil. But ahead of them, the stars glittered with endless possibilities. The revolution she never wanted, but always knew was coming, had finally begun. And it hadn't started with warships and armies, but with a few words of truth. A truth that had become too heavy for a government of lies to carry. At the center of it all, a simple cargo pilot and a cursed Empress were about to prove that the most impossible partnerships could build the brightest futures. The weeks that followed the disaster at the assembly were a blur of constant crises and hard-fought victories. From their mobile command center on the Drifter's flame, Iria and Joran coordinated a revolution that never dared call itself one. 17 more systems have officially rejected Varric's martial law, Director Saurin reported during a daily briefing, her holographic image flickering with fatigue. The entire colonial administration is basically running itself now. "What about food shipments?" Iria asked, her eyes glued to the real-time data streams Vin was managing. "Getting better," Saurin confirmed. "The Arendor convoys are making it through. Lord Gavern's coalition is making sure the routes are secure. It's amazing what merchants can accomplish when doing the right thing also happens to be profitable." Joran leaned in from his sensor station. "And Varric's loyalists? Surely not all of them have abandoned him." "The 3rd and 7th fleets are still under his command," Admiral Valthor cut in, her own hologram appearing. "But we're seeing cracks. Crews are deserting, and some officers are getting very creative with how they interpret his orders." Imagine being handed the keys to an empire-controlling superweapon, only to find out it has a democratic off switch. That was the injustice facing the tyrant Var. He'd seized the capital, but the legendary Dominion Rod, a tool of absolute control, refused to obey him. 3 times he'd tried to activate it, and 3 times it failed. Why? Because of an ancient safeguard my ancestors built into its very core. It required the consent of the people it was meant to rule. For a man like Var, that was an insult he couldn't stomach. He was cornered, holed up with his fanatical followers. And a cornered tyrant is a dangerous one. My name is Iria, and this is the story of how we took back our future from a man who wanted to own it. If you believe that freedom is worth fighting for, stick around to see how we did it. Just as we were planning our next move, the most unexpected thing happened. A message arrived, not from VAR, but from a new provisional assembly popping up right in the middle of his territory. They wanted to negotiate. "It's a trap," my admiral, Valor, said instantly. And she was probably right, but it was also a glimmer of hope. These weren't just politicians, they were guild leaders, heads of minor houses, even some of VAR's own military officers who'd had enough. We couldn't just ignore it. I had to make a call, and I decided on a move no one saw coming. "Joran," I said, "I need you to go talk to them." He just raised an eyebrow. Sending him, a regular human, to negotiate with the Dominion's high and mighty nobility? It was a bold, crazy move. But Joran wasn't just any human. He was the advocate who had once spoken truth to their faces in their own grand hall. I knew they'd respect that, even if they'd never admit it out loud. "I'll get a shuttle ready," he said, a small smile playing on his lips. Our tactical AI, Vin, chimed in dryly. "Just so you know, the probability of violence is disappointingly high." Joran just shot back. "That's because we keep doing dangerously stupid things." After the briefing, when the holograms of my team faded away, it was just Joran and me on the bridge. The silent stars outside didn't offer any comfort. "You don't have to do this," I told him softly. "Yes, I do," he said, turning to look me right in the eye. "This whole thing only works if we take the same risks we ask of everyone else." I tried to lighten the mood. "I could order you not to, you know." He smiled, a real warm smile this time. "You could try, but we both know you won't. And we both know I'll be careful," he added. I walked over to him and placed my hand on his chest, feeling the steady, solid beat of his heart. A simple human anchor in a galaxy spiraling into chaos. That pulse felt more precious than anything else in the universe. "Joran," I started, but my voice caught. "I know," he said, covering my hand with his. "When this is all over, when we've actually built something worth having, we'll have time for all the words we're holding back right now. I promise." A promise? I looked into his eyes, searching for certainty. He gave me a small, lopsided grin. "Have I ever lied to you?" I leaned in and kissed him, pouring all my fear, all my hope, and every unspoken dream into that one moment. It was a quiet, intense kiss, our shared act of defiance against the chaos. When we pulled apart, his eyes were shining with an emotion I'd never seen in him before. "For luck," I whispered. "I'll take all I can get," he replied. 4 hours later, I watched his shuttle streak away toward the enemy capital, my chest tight with a worry I couldn't shake. All I could do was wait and plan, while my mind kept replaying the image of Joran, walking straight into the lion's den armed with nothing but his words and his wits. The first report came in 12 hours later. Joran had arrived and was meeting with the assembly. 6 hours after that, another update. The talks were going well. The assembly seemed genuine. And then, silence. "Multiple military-grade jammers just went active," Vin reported, her usual robotic humor gone. "Someone is locking down all signals from the capital." It could only be one person. "VAR," I said, my fists clenching. "He's making his move." The next few hours were absolute torture. I tried to distract myself, coordinating supply runs and diplomatic messages, but my thoughts kept circling back to Joran, facing that danger all alone. Then, a communication channel opened from a source I never expected. It was Lord Gavin, a nobleman I thought was neutral, broadcasting from his estate near the capital. "Iria," he began, "I have news, and not all of it is good." My stomach dropped. "Is Joran alive?" "He is," Gavin said, looking exhausted. But the situation has changed. The negotiations were going too well. Var couldn't let that happen. He launched a full-scale assault on the commercial quarter to crush the assembly. My heart seized, but he kept talking. He failed. And not because of the assembly's guards. He failed because of your advocate. Joran did something inexplicable. Witnesses describe it as an expanding field of nothing, Gavin continued. Weapons just died. Vehicles stalled out. Even the soldiers' high-tech augmentations went dark. The attack completely fell apart in minutes. The null field. Joran had unleashed his hidden ability on a massive scale, and I knew it must have taken a huge toll on him. Where is he now? I asked, my voice tight. He's in protective custody with the assembly, Gavin said. They're a little spooked by what they saw, but they're incredibly grateful. Var's attack proved he will never compromise. They want you to come, to address not just them, but the entire planet. They're ready to recognize your authority. But I knew I couldn't just step back into the old system. Not as Empress, I said firmly. No, Gavin agreed. As something new. They're proposing a transitional council with shared leadership between the noble houses, the guilds, and the colonies. You would be the first speaker, with the power to finally enact real reforms. It was more than I had ever dared to hope for, but it felt too easy. Var wouldn't just give up after one failed attack, I said. He hasn't, Gavin confirmed, his expression turning grim. He's lost all legitimacy, but he's fortified the government quarter. And there's more. Our intelligence says he's gotten into the deep archives, sealed sections that even past emperors were forbidden to touch. A chill shot down my spine. Those archives held secrets and weapons considered too dangerous for any era. If Var was desperate enough to break those ancient seals... I'll come, I said, my decision made. But Admiral Valor's fleet will escort us. I want guarantees of safe passage for everyone. Already arranged, Gavin said with a faint smile. Your revolution of words is working, Iria. Let's just hope we can finish it without more bloodshed. The transmission ended, but my mind was churning. What kind of nightmare had my ancestors buried in those archives? And what was Var about to unleash? The journey felt like it took forever, and no time at all. Messages of support were flooding in from all over. Colonies pledging aid, noble houses switching sides, even some of Var's own generals offering to surrender. It's all happening too fast, I confided to my advisor, Elora. Empires don't just change overnight. They do when the cracks were already there, she replied wisely. Var didn't break the Dominion. He just showed everyone the rot that was already inside. You're not tearing anything down, Iria. You're offering something better to build in its place. As we approached the planet, I could see she was right. Merchant ships moved freely without military escorts, and the massive defense platforms were powered down. It was a world breathing a sigh of relief. Our landing was surreal. There were no honor guards or fancy ceremonies, just committees of people working, turning luxury hotels into refugee centers and parade grounds into food distribution hubs. Joran was waiting for me on the landing pad. He looked exhausted, but he was in one piece. I wanted to run to him, but I had to wait until we were away from the cameras. You're okay, I breathed, relief washing over me. Mostly, he said, flexing his fingers. A slight tremor gave away the cost of his actions. Pushing the null field that far, it takes a toll. But it was worth it just to see the looks on their faces when their fancy blasters turned into useless clubs. Vin said violence was likely, I said, a real smile finally breaking through. Vin underestimated human stubbornness, Joran replied. The assembly wants peace. They're done bleeding for Var's ego. Just then a young woman in an administrator's uniform approached. First speaker, she said, the assembly is ready for your address. The title felt strange, but also right. Not a ruler, but a voice. The assembly hall itself was different, with seats arranged in a circle. Nobles sat next to merchants, and officers sat beside colonial leaders. But before we could begin, the moderator stood. "We have a problem," he announced. "Lord Var has cut off all communication from the government quarter. Our intelligence suggests he's planning to use something from the sealed archives." "What's in those archives?" I asked directly. An elderly archivist rose, his face pale and grim. "Weapons from the founding wars. Technologies deemed too dangerous to ever be used again. But the worst of them is a device called the Psyche Crucible." The room filled with panicked whispers. I raised a hand for silence. "What does it do?" The archivist swallowed hard. "The records are incomplete, but it is believed to be a device capable of planetary-scale mental domination." The big reveal hit us like a physical blow. Var wasn't just trying to win a war. He was going to enslave the minds of an entire planet. I rose to my feet. "I propose one final offer," I announced. "Full amnesty for Var in exchange for his immediate surrender. Exile to a comfortable but isolated world. No trials, no executions." Someone in the crowd shouted, "But he tried to slaughter us." "And we," I replied, my voice ringing with a resolve I didn't know I had, "will show him that we are better than him." "And if our answer is just more bloodshed, how are we any different from him?" Iria argued, her glowing glyphs pulsing with a steady, controlled light. "This cycle of revenge has to end with us, or it won't end at all." The debate that followed was intense but short. Practicality won out. The assembly voted to extend the offer, praying Varric was sane enough to take it. But they never got the chance. Sirens shrieked to life across the entire city as a colossal pillar of light erupted from the ancient palace, tearing at the sky like a clawed hand reaching from the ground. "He's activated it," the archivist gasped, his voice shaking. "Prime Creator, save us! He actually did it!" "Evacuation protocols now!" Iria's voice cut through the rising panic like a knife. "Get everyone to minimum safe distance." She spun to face Joran Vault, her glyphs flaring with frantic energy. "Can your null field do anything against that?" "I don't know," Joran said, his face a mask of grim determination as he already started moving for the door. "Something that huge, but I'm going to try." "We'll try," Iria corrected, falling in step right beside him, her own resolve a perfect match for his. They grabbed a military skimmer, weaving through streets already jammed with terrified people trying to escape. The energy pillar in the government district burned even brighter, a terrifying beacon of pure menace. Iria felt a huge, hungry presence pushing against the walls of her mind, trying to get in like a wolf at the door. The Psyche Crucible. She realized with a jolt of horror that it wasn't a weapon. It was a parasite, a starving entity that fed on consciousness itself. It felt sickeningly similar to the thing in the Void Shroud. Maybe they were the same species. A deep, ancient part of her genetic memory began to stir, knowledge from ages past bubbling to the surface. "My ancestors didn't build defenses against being owned," she whispered to herself. "They built them to fight these things." They reached the edge of the government quarter, just as the pillar pulsed, each wave a psychic whisper offering limitless power in exchange for total submission. All around them, civilians without protection began to falter, their eyes going glassy and vacant as they succumbed to the crucible's siren song. "Shield them!" Iria yelled, and Joran's null field instantly expanded, a silent wall against the psychic assault. The whispers inside his sphere of influence simply vanished. People began shaking their heads, looking around as if they were waking up from a terrible dream. "I can't hold a field this big for long," Joran said through clenched teeth, the strain showing on his face. "You won't have to," Iria replied, stepping out in front of him. Her glyphs burst into a brilliant, furious light. "This is what I was born for." The defensive abilities coded into her very DNA roared to life. It wasn't the passive shield she had always known. This was an active, aggressive force designed specifically for this kind of threat. Her consciousness shot outward, meeting the parasite's attack with a stunningly complex, geometric defense, a lattice of pure defiance woven from an ancient blueprint. "You are obsolete," the parasite hissed, its voice a chorus of all the minds it had stolen. "Your protections are chains. Give in and you will be free." "I am already free," Iria shot back, her words a blade of pure willpower. "Free to choose, free to protect, and free to reject you completely." The fight wasn't physical, but it felt more real than any battle she had ever fought. The parasite hammered against her defenses, searching for any tiny crack. But while it was ancient and arrogant, Iria was focused and determined, meeting its every attack with unbending defiance. "You can't stand against me alone," it snarled. "She's not alone," Joran said, his voice calm and steady behind her. He placed a hand on her shoulder. His null field merged with her defenses, not as two separate powers, but as one seamless whole. Her fortress of light and his void of absolute stability. Where she pushed back, he absorbed. Together, they were unbreakable. The parasite reeled, its attack faltering for the first time, and the massive energy pillar in the government quarter flickered. "Now!" Iria shouted, seizing the opportunity. She reached out with her mind, following the ancient connections in her bloodline to touch the psyche crucible itself, not to control it, but to understand it. It was thousands of years older than the Silith Dominion, and at its very heart was a single fragile circuit, one thread that could be cut. "Joran, you need to null the power source, the heart of the pillar." "That's 1/2 kilometer from here," he said, his hand tightening on her shoulder. "Can I do it for you? I'd null the sun itself if you asked me to." His field collapsed inward, then shot out in a perfectly straight, focused beam. Guided by their mental connection, it passed right through her defenses and hit the crucible's core with surgical precision. The pillar vanished instantly. The crushing mental pressure was gone. In the deafening silence that followed, it felt like the entire city took a collective breath. "Is it over?" Joran asked, swaying on his feet, his face pale from exhaustion. Before Iria could even answer, a series of massive explosions tore through the government quarter. The ancient palace, a symbol of centuries of power, began to crumble in on itself. Its own fail-safes were enacting a final revenge for Varric's insane arrogance. When the dust finally settled, nothing was left but rubble. Search teams would later find Varric's body, crushed beneath the weight of his own monstrous ambition. But in that moment, all Iria could do was hold Joran as he trembled from the effort, whispering a silent thank you to the ancestors who were wise enough to weave salvation into their children's genes. The weeks that followed were a blur of building, not destroying. The Provisional Assembly quickly became the Transitional Council, with Iria elected as its first speaker to help guide their collective choices. Trade routes began to open up. The Arendor established permanent embassies, and desperately needed food and medicine started flowing to the starving colonies. "It's actually working," Director Saun reported during a meeting in the newly rebuilt government quarter. "Productivity is up in every sector. Birth rates in the colonies are starting to recover. We've even got neighboring systems asking about trade deals." "Let's not get too comfortable," Admiral Valor warned. "The Nebula Reavers are still out there. Now that they know Varric's fleet positions are gone, they're going to smell an opportunity." "Then let's offer them a partnership instead," Lord Gavern suggested. "Trades that are more profitable than raiding. Some of them might actually go for it." Ideas that radical would have been laughed out of the room under the old regime. Now, they were actual agenda items to be debated and worked on. Through it all, Iria and Joran were a perfect team. His dry sense of humor was a lifesaver during tense negotiations and logistical nightmares, while her strategic vision inspired everyone without ever needing to command them. Together, they were building an interstellar government based on consent, not on conquest. One evening, they were watching the sunset from their shared quarters on the Drifter's Flame, which was now basically a mobile office for long-range missions. "I have a gift for you," Joran said quietly. He handed her a small bar. Inside was a pin, the Silith Dominion spiral galaxy, but reimagined. The stars swirled together in cooperative patterns, not a rigid hierarchy. "It's the new seal," he said. "The council approved it this morning. I figured you should be the first one to wear it." Iria pinned it to her collar, feeling the weight of what it represented. "It's perfect, though you forgot to mention you designed it." "Details," he said, pulling her into a hug. "The real point is what it stands for. A month ago, you asked me what I wanted. Well, I finally have my answer. I want to build something worthwhile with someone who is worth building it with." She laughed, her glyphs glowing with a warm light. "Even if she glows whenever she gets emotional? Even if he shuts off the artificial gravity plates every time he sneezes," Joran shot back. "It was one time, and I was congested." They stood there together, watching the city lights bloom in the twilight below. Old enemies were now partners. Starving colonies were planning their next harvests. Children were learning that power could be used to build things, not just break them. "Vin wants a job in the new government," Joran said, breaking the silence. "Something about her consciousness expansion." "What kind of job?" Iria asked, amused. "Minister of Accurate Probability Calculations," he said with a straight face. "She claims she's only smug 97% of the time." Iria leaned into his embrace, a smile on her face. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, it didn't feel impossible. They had proven that empires could change, that curses could become blessings, and that a pilot and a warrior could save a galaxy with a little trust and a lot of grit. "What's next?" she asked. "Tomorrow we have that council meeting on agricultural subsidies," Joran said. "Next week, talks with the Reavers. And next month, Vin will start nagging us about those weird energy readings near the Void Shroud." "I meant for us," she said, turning to face him in his arms. He kissed her on the forehead, his lips lingering for a moment in a quiet promise. "Whatever we choose. That's the whole point, isn't it? We actually get to choose." The luxury of choice, the weight of real freedom. Her ancestors had woven protections into her very genes, but she was learning that the greatest shield of all was much simpler. It was having someone who saw her as a person, not a position. "Then I choose this," she said, meeting his eyes. "The work, the challenges, this impossible future we're building, even the subsidies." Her smile grew wider, but mostly, "I choose you, the impossible human who makes all of this possible." "Technically, we make each other possible," he corrected, his eyes shining. "Details," she echoed, and they kissed as the first stars began to appear in the sky. Two impossibilities, building a very real tomorrow. Down in the city below, the new Empathy Academy was holding its first classes, teaching public officials how to understand their people, not just rule them. The curse had become a curriculum. The weapon had become wisdom. Historians would one day mark this as the true beginning of the new Silith Dominion, not the drama of the Harvest Festival or even the battle with the parasite, but the quiet moment when power chose to serve instead of rule. For now, though, it was just a woman and a man, building a future one impossible day at a time. In her office aboard the Drifter's Flame, Vin was composing her masterpiece, a probability calculation proving that hope, determination, and trust were the variables that equaled tomorrow. As usual, she was right, but for the first time, being right felt less like a victory and more like a promise. The galaxy kept turning, carrying with it a cargo ship, a warrior, a pilot, and the radical new idea that the highest purpose of power was to make sure that no one was ever powerless again. And all things considered, that was a damn fine idea.